mere name became a crime, and the common hatred was formulated in this sentence: magicians to the flames, as it was shouted some centuries earlier, to the lions with the Christians. Now the multitude never conspires except against real powers. It does not know what is true, but it has the instinct of what is strong. It remained for the 18th century to deride both Christians and magic, while infatuated with the disquisitions of Rousseau and the illusions of Cagliostro. Science, notwithstanding, is at the basis of magic, as at the root of Christianity there is love. And in the gospel symbols we find the Word incarnate adored in his cradle by three magi, led thither by a star, the triad and the sign of the microcosm, and receiving their gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, a second mysterious triplicity, under which emblem the highest secrets of the Kabbalah are allegorically contained. Christianity owes, therefore, no hatred to magic, but human ignorance has ever stood in fear of the unknown. The science was driven into hiding to escape the impassioned assaults of blind desire. It clothed itself with new hieroglyphics, falsified its intentions, denied its hopes. Then it was that the jargon of alchemy was created, an impenetrable illusion for the vulgar in their greed of gold, a living language only for the true disciple of Hermes. Extraordinary fact. Among the sacred records of the Christians there are two texts which the infallible Church makes no claim to understand and has never attempted to expound. These are the prophecy of Ezekiel and the Apocalypse, two Kabbalistic keys reserved assuredly in heaven for the commentaries of Magi and Kings, books sealed as with 7 seals for faithful believers, yet perfectly plain to an initiated infidel of the occult sciences. There is also another work, but although it is popular in a sense and may be found everywhere, this is of all most occult and unknown, because it is the key of the rest. It is in public evidence without being known to the public. No one suspects its existence, and no one dreams of seeking it where it actually is. This book, which may be older than that of Enoch, has never been translated, but is still preserved unmutilated in primeval characters on detached leaves, like the tablets of the ancients. The fact has eluded notice, though a distinguished scholar has revealed, not indeed its secret, but its antiquity and singular preservation. Another scholar, but of a mind more fantastic than judicious, passed 30 years in the study of this masterpiece, and has merely suspected its plenary importance. It is, in truth, a monumental and extraordinary work, strong and simple as the architecture of the pyramids, and consequently enduring like those, a book which is the summary of all sciences, which can resolve all problems by its infinite combinations, which speaks by evoking thought, is the inspirer and moderator of all possible conceptions, and the masterpiece, perhaps, of the human mind. It is to be counted unquestionably among the very great gifts bequeathed to us by antiquity. It is a universal key, the name of which has been explained and comprehended only by the learned William Postel. It is a unique test, whereof the initial characters alone plunged into ecstasy the devout spirit of St. Martin, and might have restored reason to the sublime and unfortunate Swedenborg. We shall recur to this book later on, for its mathematical and precise explanation will be the complement and crown of our conscientious undertaking. The original alliance between Christianity and the science of the Magi, once demonstrated fully, will be a discovery of no second-rate importance, and we do not doubt that the serious study of magic and the Kabbalah will lead earnest minds to a reconciliation of science and dogma, of reason and faith, heretofore regarded as impossible. We have said that the Church, whose special office is the custody of the keys, does not pretend to possess those of the Apocalypse or of Ezekiel. In the opinion of Christians, the scientific and magical clavicles of Solomon are lost, which, notwithstanding, it is certain that in the domain of intelligence ruled by the Word, nothing that has been written can perish. Whatsoever men cease to understand exists for them no longer, at least in the order of the Word, and it passes then into the domain of enigma and mystery. Furthermore, the antipathy and even open war of the official church against all that belongs to the realm of magic, which is a kind of personal and emancipated priesthood, is allied with necessary and even with inherent causes in the social and hierarchic constitution of Christian sacerdotalism. The church ignores magic, for she must either ignore it or perish, as we shall prove later on. Yet she does not recognize the less that her mysterious founder was saluted in his cradle by three magi, that is to say, by the hieratic ambassadors of the three parts of the known world and the three analogical worlds of occult philosophy. In the school of Alexandria, magic and Christianity almost joined hands under the auspices of Ammonius Saccas and of Plato. The doctrine of Hermes is found almost in its entirety in the writings attributed to Dionysius the Areopagite. Synesius outlined the plan of a treatise on dreams, which was annotated subsequently by Cardon, and composed hymns that might have served for the liturgy of the Church of Swedenborg. Could a Church of the Illuminated possess a liturgy? With this period of fiery abstractions and impassioned warfare of words, there must be connected also the philosophic reign of Julian, called the Apostate because in his youth he made unwilling profession of Christianity. Everyone is aware that Julian had the misfortune to be a hero out of season of Plutarch, and that he was, if one may say so, the Don Quixote of Roman chivalry. But what most people do not know is that he was one of the illuminated and an initiate of the First Order, that he believed in the unity of God and in the universal doctrine of the Trinity, that in a word he regretted nothing of the old world, but its magnificent symbols and its too gracious images. Julian was not a pagan. He was a Gnostic, allured by the allegories of Greek polytheism, who had the misfortune to find the name of Jesus Christ less sonorous than that of Orpheus. The emperor paid in his person for the academical tastes of the philosopher and rhetorician, and alter affording himself the spectacle and satisfaction of expiring like Epaminondas with the periods of Cato. He had in public opinion by this time fully Christianized, but anathemas for his funeral oration and a scornful epithet for his ultimate memorial. Let us pass over the petty minds and small matters of the Boss Empire and proceed to the Middle Ages. Stay, take this book. Glance at the 7th page and then seat yourself on the mantle which I am spreading, and let each of us cover our eyes with one of its corners. Your head swims, does it not, and the earth seems to fly beneath your feet. Hold tightly and do not look right or left. The vertigo ceases. We are here. Stand up and open your eyes, but take care before all things to make no Christian sign and to pronounce no Christian words. We are in a landscape of Salvator Rosa, a troubled wilderness which seems resting after a storm. There's no moon in the sky, but you can distinguish little stars gleaming in the brushwood, and may hear about you the slow flight of great birds, which seem to whisper strange oracles as they pass. Let us approach silently that crossroad among the rocks. A harsh funereal trumpet winds suddenly, and black torches flare up on every side. A tumultuous throng is surging round a vacant throne. All watch and wait. Suddenly they cast themselves on the ground. A goat-headed prince bounds forward among them. He ascends the throne, turns, and assuming a stooping posture, presents to the assembly a human face, which everyone comes forward to salute and to kiss, their black taper in their hands. With a hoarse laugh, he recovers an upright position, and then distributes gold, secret instructions, occult medicines, and poisons to his faithful bondsmen. Meanwhile, fires are lighted of fern and alder, piled up with human bones and the fat of executed criminals. Druidesses, crowned with wild parsley and vervain, immolate unbaptized children with golden knives and prepare horrible love feasts. Tables are spread, masked men seat themselves by half-nude females, and a bacchanalian orgy begins. There is nothing wanting but salt, the symbol of wisdom and immortality. Wine flows in streams, leaving stains like blood. Obscene advances and abandoned caresses begin. A little while, and the whole assembly is beside itself with drink and wantonness, with crimes and singing. They rise, a disordered throng, and form infernal dances. Then come all the legendary monsters, all phantoms of nightmare. Enormous toads play inverted flutes and thump with paws on flanks. Limping scarabaei mingle in the dance. Crabs play the castanets. Crocodiles beat time on their scales. Elephants and mammoths appear habited like cupids and footed in the ring. Finally, the giddy circles break up and scatter on all sides. Every yelling dancer drags away a disheveled female. Lamps and candles formed of human fat go out smoking in the darkness. Cries are heard here and there, mingled with peals of laughter, blasphemies and rattlings in the throat. Come, rouse yourself. Do not make the sign of the cross. See, I have brought you home. You are in your bed, not a little worn out, possibly a trifle shattered by your night's journey and its orgy, but you have beheld that of which everyone talks without knowledge. You have been initiated into secrets no less terrible than the grotto of Tryphonius. You have been present at the Sabbath. It remains for you now to preserve your wits, to have a wholesome dread of the law, and to keep at a respectful distance from the church and her faggots. Would you care, as a change, to behold something less fantastic, more real, and also more truly terrible? You shall assist at the execution of Jacques Desmoulins and his accomplices or his brethren in martyrdom. Be not misled, however. Confuse not the guilty and the innocent. Did the Templars really adore the Baphomet? Did they offer a shameful salutation to the buttocks of the goat of Mendes? What was actually this secret and potent association which imperiled both church and state, and was thus destroyed unheard? Judge nothing lightly. They are guilty of a great crime. They have exposed to profane eyes the sanctuary of antique initiation. They have gathered again and have shared the fruits of the tree of knowledge, so that they might become masters of the world. The judgment pronounced against them is higher and far older than the tribunal of pope or king. On that day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die, said God himself, as we read in the book of Genesis. What then is taking place in the world, and why do priests and potentates tremble? What secret power threatens tiaras and crowns? A few bedlamites are roaming from land to land, concealing, as they say, the philosophical stone under their ragged vesture. They can change earth into gold, and they are without food or lodging. Their brows are encircled by an aureole of glory and by a shadow of ignominy. One has discovered the universal science and goes vainly seeking death to escape the agonies of his triumph. He is the Majorcan Raymond Lully. Another heals imaginary diseases by fantastic remedies, belying beforehand that proverb which enforceth the futility of a cautery on a wooden leg. He is the marvelous Paracelsus, always drunk and always lucid, like the heroes of Rabelais. Here is William Postal writing naively to the fathers of the Council of Trent, proclaiming that he has discovered the absolute doctrine, hidden from the foundation of the world, and is longing to share it with them. The council heeds not the maniac, does not vouchsafe to condemn him, but proceeds to examine the grave questions of efficacious grace and sufficing grace. He whom we behold perishing poor and abandoned is Cornelius Agrippa, less of a magician than any, though the vulgar persist in regarding him as a more potent sorcerer than all, because he was sometimes a cynic and mystifier. What secret do these men bear with them to their tomb? Why are they wondered at without being understood? Why are they condemned unheard? Why are they initiates of those terrific secret sciences of which the church and society are afraid? Why are they acquainted with things of which others know nothing? Why do they conceal what all men burn to know? Why are they invested with a dread and unknown power? The occult sciences, magic. These words will reveal all and give food for further thought. De omni re scribili et quibusdum aliis. But what, as a fact, was this magic? What was the power of these men who were at once so proud and so persecuted? If they were really strong, why did they not overcome their enemies? But if they were impotent and foolish, why did people honor them by fearing them? Does magic exist? Is there an occult knowledge which is in truth a power and works wonders comparable to the miracles of authorized religions? To these two palmary questions we make answer by an affirmation and a book. The book shall justify the affirmation, and the affirmation is this: there was and there still is a potent and real magic. All that is said of it in legend is true after a certain manner, yet contrary to the common course of popular exaggeration, it falls below the truth. There is indeed a formidable secret, the revelation of which has once already transformed the world, as testified in Egyptian religious tradition, summarized symbolically by Moses at the beginning of Genesis. This secret constitutes the fatal science of good and evil, and the consequence of its revelation is death. Moses depicts it under the figure of a tree which stands in the midst of the terrestrial paradise, is in proximity to the tree of life, and is joined at the root thereto. At the foot of this tree is the source of the four mysterious rivers. It is guarded by the sword of fire and by the four symbolical forms of the biblical Sphinx, the cherubim of Ezekiel. Here I must pause, and I fear that already I have said too much. I testify and find that there is one sole, universal, and imperishable dogma, strong as supreme reason, simple, like all that is great, intelligible, like all that is universally and absolutely true, and this dogma is the parent of all others. There is also a science which confers on man powers apparently superhuman. They are enumerated thus in a Hebrew manuscript of the 16th century. Hereinafter follow the powers and privileges of him who holds in his right hand the clavicles of Solomon, and in his left the branch of the blossoming almond. Aleph. He beholds God face to face without dying, and converses familiarly with the seven genii who command the entire celestial army. Beth. He is above all griefs and all fears. Gimel. He reigns with all heaven and is served by all hell. Daleth. He rules his own health and life and can influence equally those of others. Hey. Hey can neither be surprised by misfortune nor overwhelmed by disasters, nor can he be conquered by his enemies. Vow. He knows the reason of the past, present, and future. Zain. He possesses the secret of the resurrection of the dead and the key of immortality. Such are the seven chief privileges, and those which rank next are these: Chaith, to find the philosophical stone; Teth, to possess the universal medicine; Iod, to know the laws of perpetual motion and to prove the quadrature of the circle; Kath, to change into gold not only all metals but also the earth itself, and even the refuse of the earth; Lamed, to subdue the most ferocious animals and have power to pronounce those words which paralyze and charm serpents; Mem, to have the ars notoria which gives the universal science; Nun, to speak learnedly on all subjects without preparation and without study. These finally are the seven least powers of the Magus. Samek, to know at a glance the deep things of the souls of men and the mysteries of the hearts of women. Ayin, to force nature to make him free at his pleasure. Pe, to foresee all future events which do not depend on a superior free will or an undiscernible cause. Sade, to give at once and to all the most efficacious consolations and the most wholesome counsels. Kof, to triumph over adversities. Resh, to conquer love and hate. Shin, to have the secret of wealth, to be always its master and never its slave, to enjoy even poverty and never become abject or miserable. Tau. Let us add to these three septenaries that the wise man rules the elements, stills tempests, cures the diseased by his touch, and raises the dead. But certain things have been sealed by Solomon with his triple seal. It is enough that the initiates know, as for others, whether they deride, doubt, or believe, whether they threaten or fear, what matters it to science or to us? Such actually are the issues of occult philosophy, and we are in a position to meet the charge of insanity or the suspicion of imposture when we affirm that these privileges are real. To To demonstrate this is the sole end of our work on occult philosophy, the philosophical stone, the universal medicine, the transmutation of metals, the quadrature of the circle, and the secret of perpetual motion are neither mystifications of science nor dreams of delusion. They are terms which must be understood in their proper sense. They formulate the varied applications of one and the same secret, the several aspects of a single operation which is defined in a more comprehensive manner under the name of the great work. Furthermore, there exists in nature a force which is immeasurably more powerful than steam, and a single man who is able to adapt and direct it might change thereby the face of the whole world. This force was known to the ancients. It consists in a universal agent having equilibrium for its supreme law, while its direction is concerned immediately with the great arcanum of transcendental magic. By the direction of this agent, it is possible to modify the very order of the seasons, to produce at night the phenomena of day, to correspond instantaneously between one extremity of earth and the other, to see, like Apollonius, what is taking place on the other side of the world, to heal or injure at a distance, to give speech a universal success and reverberation. This agent, which barely manifests under the uncertain methods of Mesmer's followers, is precisely that which the adepts of the Middle Ages denominated the first matter of the great work. The Gnostics represented it as the fiery body of the Holy Spirit. It was the object of adoration in the secret rites of the Sabbath and the Temple, under the hieroglyphic figure of Baphomet or the androgyny of Mendes. All of this will be proved. Here then are the secrets of occult philosophy, and such is magic in history. Let us glance at it now as it appears in its books and its acts, in its initiations and its rites. The key of all magical allegories is found in the tablets which we have mentioned, and these tablets we regard as the work of Hermes. About this book, which may be called the keystone of the whole edifice of occult science, are grouped innumerable legends that are either its partial translation or its commentary reproduced perpetually under 1,000 varied forms. Sometimes the ingenious fables combine harmoniously into a great epic which characterizes an epoch, though how or why is not clear to the uninitiated. Thus, the fabulous history of the Golden Fleece resumes and also veils the hermetic and magical doctrines of Orpheus. And if we recur only to the mysterious poetry of Greece, it is because the sanctuaries of Egypt and India to some extent dismay us by their resources, leaving our choice embarrassed in the midst of such abundant wealth. We are eager, moreover, to reach the Thebaid at once, that dread synthesis of all doctrine, past, present, and future. That, so to speak, infinite fable which reaches, like the deity of Orpheus, to either end of the cycle of human life. Extraordinary fact. The 7 gates of Thebes, attacked and defended by 7 chiefs who have sworn upon the blood of victims, possess the same significance as the 7 seals of the sacred book, interpreted by 7 genii and assailed by a monster with 7 heads, after being opened by a lamb which liveth and was dead in the allegorical work of St. John. The mysterious origin of Oedipus, found hanging on the tree of Cithaeron like a bleeding fruit, recalls the symbols of Moses and the narratives of Genesis. He makes war upon his father, whom he slays without knowing. Tremendous prophecy of the blind emancipation of reason, apart from science. Thereafter he meets with the Sphinx, that symbol of symbols, the eternal enigma of the vulgar, the granite pedestal of the sciences of the sages, the voracious and silent monster whose unchanging form expresses the one dogma of the great universal mystery. How is the tetrad changed into the duad and explained by the triad? In more common but more emblematic terms, what is that animal which in the morning has 4 feet, 2 at noon, and 3 in the evening? Philosophically speaking, how does the doctrine of elementary forces produce the dualism of Zoroaster? Well, it is summarized by the triad of Pythagoras and Plato. What is the ultimate reason of allegories and numbers, the final message of all symbolisms? Oedipus replies with a simple and terrible word which destroys the Sphinx and makes the diviner king of Thebes. The answer to the enigma is man. Unfortunate, he has seen too much, and yet through a clouded glass. A little while, and he will expiate his ominous and imperfect clairvoyance by a voluntary blindness, and then vanish in the midst of a storm, like all civilizations, which, each in its own day, shall divine an answer to the riddle of the Sphinx without grasping its whole import and mystery. Everything is symbolical and transcendental in this titanic epic of human destinies. The two antagonistic brothers formulate the second part of the grand mystery, completely divinely by the sacrifice of Antigone. There follows the last war. The brethren slay one another. Capaneus is destroyed by the lightning which he defies. Amphiaraus is swallowed by the earth. And all these are so many allegories which, by their truth and their grandeur, astonish those who can penetrate their triple hieratic sense. Aeschylus, annotated by Ballanche, gives only a weak notion concerning them. Whatever the primeval sublimities of the Greek poet or the ingenuities of the French critic. The secret book of antique initiation was not unknown to Homer, who outlines its plan and chief figures on the shield of Achilles with minute precision. But the gracious Homeric fictions replaced too soon in popular memory the simple and abstract truths of primeval revelation. Humanity clung to the form and allowed the idea to be forgotten. Signs lost power in their multiplication. Magic became corrupted also at this period, and degenerated with the sorcerers of Thessaly into the most profane enchantments. The crime of Oedipus brought forth its deadly fruits, and the science of good and evil erected evil into a sacrilegious divinity. Men, weary of the light, took refuge in the shadow of bodily substance. The dream of that void which is filled by God seemed in their eyes to be greater than God himself, and thus hell was created. When in the course of this work we make use of the consecrated terms God, heaven, and hell, let it be understood once and for all that our meaning is as far removed from that which the profane attach to them as initiation is remote from the vulgar thought. God for us is the Azot of the sages, the efficient and final principle of the great work. Returning to the fable of Oedipus, the crime of the king of Thebes was that he failed to understand the Sphinx, that he destroyed the scourge of Thebes without being pure enough to complete the expiation in the name of his people. The plague in consequence avenged speedily the death of the monster, and the king of Thebes, forced to abdicate, sacrificed himself to the terrible manes of the Sphinx, more alive and voracious than ever when it had passed from the domain of form into that of idea. Oedipus divined what was man, and he put out his own eyes because he did not see what was God. He divulged half of the great arcanum, and to save his people it was necessary for him to bear the remaining half of the terrible secret into exile and the grave. After the colossal fable of Oedipus, we find the gracious poem of Psyche, which was certainly not invented by Apuleius. The great magical arcanum reappears here under the figure of a mysterious union between a god and a weak mortal, abandoned alone and naked on a rock. Psyche must remain in ignorance of the secret of her ideal royalty, and if she behold her husband, she must lose him. Here Apuleius commentates and interprets Moses, but did not the Elohim of Israel and the gods of Apuleius both issue from the sanctuaries of Memphis and Thebes? Psyche is the sister of Eve, or rather she is Eve spiritualized. Both desire to know and lose innocence for the honor of the ordeal. Both deserve to go down into hell, one to bring back the antique box of Pandora, the other to find and to crush the head of the old serpent, who is the symbol of time and of evil. Both are guilty of the crime which must be expiated by the Prometheus of ancient days and the Lucifer of the Christian legend, the one delivered by Hercules and the other overcome by the Savior. The great magical secret is therefore the lamp and dagger of Psyche, the apple of Eve, the sacred fire of Prometheus, the burning scepter of Lucifer, but it is also the holy cross of the Redeemer. To be acquainted with it sufficiently for its abuse or divulgation is to deserve all sufferings. To know as one should alone know it, namely to make use of and conceal it, is to be master of the absolute. A single word comprehends all things, and this word consists of 4 letters. It is the tetragram of the Hebrews, the azot of the alchemists, the thod of the Bohemians, or the tarot of the Kabbalists. This word, expressed after so many manners, means God for the profane, man for the philosophers, and imparts to the adepts the final term of human sciences and the key of divine power. But he only can use it who understands the necessity of never revealing it. Had Oedipus, instead of killing the Sphinx, overcome it, harnessed it to his chariot, and thus entered Thebes, he would have been king without incest, without misfortunes, and without exile. Had Psyche, by meekness and affection, persuaded Love to reveal himself, she would never have lost Love. Now, love is one of the most mythological images of the great secret and the great agent, because it postulates at once an action and a passion, a void and a plenitude, a shaft and a wound. The initiates will understand me, and on account of the profane I must not speak more clearly. After the marvelous golden ass of Apuleius, we find no more magical epics. Science, conquered in Alexandria by the fanaticism of the murders of Hypatia, became Christian, or rather concealed itself under Christian veils with Ammonius, Synesius, and the pseudonymous author of the books of Dionysius the Areopagite. In such times it was necessary to exonerate miracles under the pretense of superstition and science by an unintelligible language. Hieroglyphic writing was revived. Pantocles and characters were invented to summarize an entire doctrine by a sign, a whole sequence of tendencies and revelations in a word. What was the end of the aspirants to knowledge? They sought the secret of the great work, the philosophical stone, the perpetual motion, the quadrature of the circle, the universal medicine, formulae which often saved them from persecution and hatred by causing them to be taxed with madness, but all signifying one of the phases of the great magical secret, as we shall show later on. This absence of epics continues till our romance of the rose, but the rose symbol, which expresses also the mysterious and magical sense of Dante's poem, is borrowed from the transcendent Kabbalah, and it is time that we should have recourse to this vast and hidden source of universal philosophy. The Bible, with all its allegories, gives expression to the religious knowledge of the Hebrews only in an incomplete and veiled manner. The book which we have mentioned, the hieratic characters of which we shall explain subsequently, that book, which William Postal names the Genesis of Enoch, existed certainly before Moses and the prophets, whose doctrine, fundamentally identical with that of the ancient Egyptians, had also its exotericism and its veils. When Moses spoke to the people, says the sacred book allegorically, he placed a veil over his face, and he removed it when communing with God. This accounts for the alleged biblical absurdities which so exercised the satirical powers of Voltaire. The books were written only as memorials of tradition and in symbols that were unintelligible to the profane. The Pentateuch and the poems of the prophets were, moreover, elementary works, alike in doctrine, ethics, and liturgy. The true secret in traditional philosophy was not committed to writing until a later period and under veils even less transparent. Thus arose a second and unknown Bible, or rather one which was not comprehended by Christians, a storehouse, so they say, of monstrous absurdities. For in this case, believers, involved by the same ignorance, speak the language of skeptics, but a monument, as we affirm, which comprises all that philosophical and religious genius has ever accomplished or imagined in the sublime order, a treasure encompassed by thorns, a diamond concealed in a rude and opaque stone. Our readers will have guessed already that we refer to the Talmud. How strange is the destiny of the Jews, those scapegoats, martyrs, and saviors of the world, a people full of vitality, a bold and hardy race, which persecutions have preserved intact because it has not yet accomplished its mission. Do not our apostolical traditions declare that after the decline of faith among the Gentiles, salvation shall again come forth out of the house of Jacob, and that then the crucified Jew, who is adored by the Christians, will give the empire of the world into the hands of God his Father? On penetrating into the sanctuary of the Kabbalah, one is seized with admiration in the presence of a doctrine so logical, so simple, and at the same time so absolute. The essential union of ideas and signs, the consecration of the most fundamental realities by primitive characters, the trinity of words, letters, and numbers. A philosophy simple as the alphabet, profound and infinite as the word. Theorems more complete and luminous than those of Pythagoras. A theology which may be summed up on the fingers. An infinite which can be held in the hollow of an infant's hand. 10 figures and 22 letters, a triangle, a square, and a circle. Such are the elements of the Kabbalah. Such also are the component principles of the written word, reflection of that spoken word which created the world. All truly dogmatic religions have issued from the Kabbalah and returned therein. Whatsoever is grand or scientific in the religious dreams of the illuminated, of Jacob Boehme, Swedenborg, St. Martin, and the rest, is borrowed from the Kabbalah. All Masonic associations owe to it their secrets and their symbols. The Kabbalah alone consecrates the alliance of universal reason and the divine word. It establishes, by the counterpoise of two forces in apparent opposition, the eternal balance of being. It alone reconciles reason with faith, power with liberty, science with mystery. It has the keys of the present, past, and future. To become initiated into the Kabbalah, it is insufficient to read and to meditate upon the writings of Reuchlin, Galatinus, Kircher, or Picus de Mirandola. It is necessary to study and understand the Hebrew writers in the collection of Pistorius, the Sefer Yetzirah above all. It is essential in particular to master the great book Zohar, to investigate the collection of 1684 entitled Kabbalah Denudata, especially the treatise on Kabbalistic pneumatics, and that on the revolution of souls, and afterwards to enter boldly into the luminous darkness of the whole dogmatic and allegorical body of the Talmud. We shall be then in a position to understand William Postel, and shall admit secretly that, apart from his very premature and over-generous dreams about the emancipation of women, this celebrated, learned, illuminated man could not have been so mad as is pretended by those who have not read him. We have sketched rapidly the history of occult philosophy. We have indicated its sources and analyzed in a few words its chief memorials. The present division of our work refers only to the science, but magic, or rather magical power, comprehends two things, a science and a force. Without the force, the science is nothing, or rather, it is a danger. To give knowledge to power alone, such is the supreme law of initiations. Hence did the great revealer say, the kingdom of heaven suffereth violence, and the violent only shall carry it away. The door of truth is closed like the sanctuary of a virgin. He must be a man who would enter. All miracles are promised to faith, and what is faith except the audacity of will which does not hesitate in the darkness, but advances towards the light in spite of all ordeals and surmounting all obstacles? It is unnecessary to repeat here the history of ancient initiations. The more dangerous and terrible they were, the greater was their efficacy. Hence, in those days, the world had men to govern and instruct it. The sacerdotal art and the royal art consisted above all in ordeals of courage, discretion, and will. It was a novitiate similar to that of those priests who, under the name of Jesuits, are so unpopular at the present day, but would govern the world notwithstanding, had they a truly wise and intelligent chief. After passing our life in the search for the absolute in religion, science, and justice, after revolving in the circle of Faust, we have reached the primal doctrine in the first book of humanity. At this point we pause, having discovered the secret of human omnipotence and indefinite progress, the key of all symbolisms, the first and final doctrine. We have come to understand what was meant by that expression so often made use of in the gospel, the kingdom of God. To provide a fixed point as a fulcrum for human activity is to solve the problem of Archimedes by realizing the use of his famous lever. This it is which was accomplished by the great initiators who have electrified the world, and they could not have done so except by means of the great and incommunicable secret. However, as a guarantee of its renewed youth, the symbolical phoenix never reappeared before the eyes of the world without having consumed solemnly the remains and evidences of its previous life. So also Moses saw to it that all those who had known Egypt and her mysteries should end their life in the desert, At Ephesus, St. Paul burnt all the books which treated of the occult sciences, and in fine, the French Revolution, daughter of the great Johannite Orient in the ashes of the Templars, spoliated the churches and blasphemed the allegories of the divine cultus. But all doctrines and all revivals prescribe magic and condemn its mysteries to the flames and to oblivion. The reason is that each religion or philosophy which comes into the world is a Benjamin of humanity, and ensures its own life by destroying its mother. It is because the symbolical serpent turns ever devouring its own tail. It is because, as essential condition of existence, a void is necessary to every plenitude, space for every dimension, an affirmation for each negation. Herein is the eternal realization of the Phoenix allegory. Two illustrious scholars have preceded me along the path that I am traveling, but they have, so to speak, spent the dark night therein. I refer to Volney and Dupuy, to Dupuy above all, whose immense erudition produced only a negative work, for in the origin of all religions he saw nothing but astronomy, taking thus the symbolic cycle for doctrine and the calendar for legend. He was deficient in one branch of knowledge, that of true magic, which comprises the secrets of the Kabbalah. Dupuy passed through the ancient sanctuaries, like the prophet Ezekiel over the plains strewn with bones, and only understood death for want of that word which collects the virtue of the four winds, and can make a living people of all the vast ossuary, by crying to the ancient symbols, "Arise, take up a new form and walk." But the hour has come when we must have the courage to attempt what no one has dared to perform previously. Like Julian, we would rebuild the temple, and in so doing, we do not believe that we shall be belying a wisdom that we venerate, which also Julian would himself have been worthy to adore, had the rancorous and fanatical doctors of his period permitted him to understand it. For us, the temple has two pillars, on one of which Christianity has inscribed its name. We have therefore no wish to attack Christianity. Far from it. We seek to explain and accomplish it. Intelligence and will have exercised alternately their power in the world. Religion and philosophy are still at war with one another, but they must end in agreement. The provisional object of Christianity was to establish, by obedience and faith, a supernatural or religious equality among men, to immobilize intelligence by faith, so as to provide a fulcrum for virtue which came for the destruction of the aristocracy of science, or rather to replace that aristocracy then already destroyed. Philosophy, on the contrary, has labored to bring back men by liberty and reason to natural inequality, and to substitute wits for virtue by inaugurating the reign of industry. Neither of these operations has proved complete or adequate. Neither has brought men to perfection and felicity. That which is now dreamed, almost without daring to hope for it, is an alliance between the two forces so long regarded as contrary, and there is good ground for desiring it, seeing that these two great powers of the human soul are no more opposed to one another than is the sex of man opposed to that of a woman. Undoubtedly they differ, but their apparently contrary dispositions come only from their aptitude to meet and unite. No less is proposed, therefore, than a universal solution of all problems. The answer is yes, unquestionably, since we are concerned with explaining the philosophical stone, perpetual motion, the secret of the great work, and of the universal medicine. We shall be accused of insanity like the divine Paracelsus, or of charlatanism like the great and unfortunate Agrippa. If the pyre of urban grandeur be extinguished, the sullen proscriptions of silence and of calumny remain. We do not defy, but are resigned to them. We have not sought the publication of this book of our own will, and we believe that if the time be come to bear witness, it will be borne by us or by others. We shall therefore remain calm and shall wait. Our work is in two parts. In the one, we establish the Kabbalistic and magical doctrine in its entirety. The other is consecrated to the cultus, that is, to ceremonial magic. The one is that which the ancient sages term the clavicle, the other that which people on the countryside still call the grimoire. The numbers and subjects of the chapters which correspond in both parts are in no sense arbitrary, and are all indicated in the great universal key, of which we give for the first time a complete and adequate explanation. Let this work now go its way where it will, and become what Providence determines. It is finished, and we believe it to be enduring, because it is strong, like all that is reasonable and conscientious. Eliphas Levi. The Candidate. Disciplina and Sophcator. When a philosopher adopted as the basis for a new apocalypse of human wisdom the axiom, "I think, therefore I am," in a measure he altered unconsciously from the standpoint of Christian revelation the old conception of the Supreme Being. "I am that I am," said the being of beings of Moses. "I am he who thinks," says the man of Descartes, and to think being to speak inwardly, such a one may affirm, like the God of St. John the Evangelist, "I am he in whom and by whom the word manifests. In principio erat verbum." Now, what is this principle? It is a groundwork of speech. It is a reason for the existence of the word. The essence of the word is in the principle. The principle is that which is. Intelligence is a principle which speaks. What further is intellectual light? It is speech. What is revelation? It is speech also. Being is the principle, speech is the means, and the plenitude or development and perfection of being is the end. To speak is to create, but to say, "I think, therefore I exist," is to argue from consequence to principle, and certain contradictions which have been adduced by a great writer, Lemony, have proved abundantly the philosophical unsoundness of this method. "I am, therefore something exists," might seem to be a more primitive and simple foundation for experimental philosophy. "I am, therefore being exists," ego sum qui sum, which is the first revelation of God in man and of man in the world, while it is also the first axiom of occult philosophy. Being is being. Hence this philosophy, having that which is for its principle, can be in no sense hypothesis or guesswork. Mercurius Trismegistus begins his admirable symbol, known under the name of the Emerald Table, by this threefold affirmation. It is true, it is certain without error, it is of all truth. Thus in physics the true confirmed by experience, in philosophy certitude purged from any alloy of error, in the domain of religion or the infinite, absolute truth indicated by analogy. Such are the first necessities of true science, and magic only can impart these to its adepts. But you, before all things, who are you, thus taking this work in your hands and proposing to read it? On the pediment of a temple consecrated by antiquity to the god of light was an inscription of 2 words, "Know thyself." I impress the same counsel on every man when he seeks to approach science. Magic, which the men of old denominated the sanctum regnum, the holy kingdom or kingdom of God, regnum Dei, exists only for kings and for priests. Are you priests? Are you kings? The priesthood of magic is not a vulgar priesthood, and its royalty enters not into competition with the princes of this world. The monarchs of science are the priests of truth, and their sovereignty is hidden from the multitude like their prayers and sacrifices. The kings of science are men who know the truth, and them the truth has made free, according to the specific promise given by the most mighty of all initiators. The man who is enslaved by his passions or worldly prejudices can be initiated in no wise. He must reform or he will never attain. Meanwhile, he cannot be an adept, for this word signifies a person who is achieved by will and by work. The man who loves his own opinions and fears to part with them, who suspects new truths, who is unprepared to doubt everything rather than admit anything on chance, should close this book. For him it is useless and dangerous. He will fail to understand it, and it will trouble him, while if he should divine the meaning, there will be a still greater source of disquietude. If you hold by anything in the world more than by reason, truth, and justice, if your will be uncertain and vacillating either in good or evil, If logic alarm you or the naked truth make you blush, if you are hurt when accepted errors are assailed, condemn this work straight away. Do not read it, let it cease to exist for you, but at the same time do not cry it down as dangerous. The secrets which it records will be understood by an elect few and will be reserved by those who understand them. Show light to the birds of the nighttime, and you hide their light. It is the light which blinds them, and for them is darker than darkness. It follows that I shall speak clearly and make known everything with the firm conviction that initiates alone, or those who deserve initiation, will read all and understand in part. There is a true and a false science, a divine and an infernal magic. In other words, one which is delusive and tenebrous. It is our task to reveal the one and to unveil the other, to distinguish the magician from the sorcerer and the adept from the charlatan. The magician avails himself of a force which he knows. The sorcerer seeks to misuse that which he does not understand. If it be possible in a scientific work to employ a term so vulgar and so discredited, then the devil gives himself to the magician and the sorcerer gives himself to the devil. The magician is the sovereign pontiff of nature. The sorcerer is her profaner only. The sorcerer is in the same relation to the magician that a superstitious and fanatical person bears to a truly religious man. Before proceeding further, let us define magic in a sentence. Magic is the traditional science of the secrets of nature which has been transmitted to us from the Magi. By means of this science, the adept is invested with a species of relative omnipotence and can operate superhumanly. That is, after a manner which transcends the normal possibility of men. Thereby many illustrious hierophants, such as Mercurius Trismegistus, Osiris, Orpheus, Apollonius of Tyana, and others whom it might be dangerous or unwise to name, came after their death to be adored and invoked as gods. Thereby others also, according to that ebb and flow of opinion which is responsible for the caprices of success, became emissaries of Infernus or suspected adventurers, like the Emperor Julian, Apuleius, the enchanter Merlin, and that arch-sorcerer, as he was termed in his day, the illustrious and unfortunate Cornelius Agrippa. To maintain the sanctum regnum, in other words, the knowledge and power of the Magi, there are four indispensable conditions: an intelligence illuminated by study, an intrepidity which nothing can check, a will which cannot be broken, and a prudence which nothing can corrupt and nothing intoxicate. To know, to dare, to will, to keep silence. Such are the four words of the Magus, inscribed upon the four symbolical forms of the Sphinx. These maxims can be combined after four manners and explained four times by one another. On the first page of the Book of Hermes, the adept is depicted with a large hat, which if turned down would conceal his entire head. One hand is raised towards heaven, which he seems to command with his wand, while the other is placed upon his breast. Before him are the chief symbols or instruments of science, and he has others hidden in a juggler's wallet. His body and arms form the letter Aleph, the first of that alphabet which the Jews borrowed from the Egyptians. To this symbol we shall have occasion to recur later on. The Magus is truly that which the Hebrew Kabbalists term microprosopis, otherwise the creator of the little world. The first of all magical sciences being the knowledge of oneself, so is one's own creation first of all works of science. It comprehends the others and is the beginning of the great work. The expression, however, requires explanation. Supreme reason being the sole invariable and consequently imperishable principle, and death as we call it being change, it follows that the intelligence which cleaves closely to this principle and in a manner identifies itself therewith, does hereby make itself unchangeable and as a result immortal. To cleave invariably to reason, it will be understood that it is necessary to attain independence of all those forces which by their fatal and inevitable operation produce the alternatives of life and death. To know how to suffer, to forbear and to die, such are the first secrets which place us beyond reach of affliction, the desires of the flesh and the fear of annihilation. The man who seeks and finds a glorious death has faith in immortality, and universal humanity believes in it with him and for him, raising altars and statues to his memory in token of eternal life. Man becomes king of the brutes only by subduing or taming them, otherwise he will be their victim or slave. Brutes are the type of our passions, they are the instinctive forces of nature. The world is a field of battle where liberty struggles with inertia by the opposition of active force. Physical laws are millstones. If you cannot be the miller, you must be the grain. You are called to be king of air, water, earth, and fire, but to reign over these four living creatures of symbolism, it is necessary to conquer and enchain them. He who aspires to be a sage and to know the great enigma of nature must be the heir and despoiler of the Sphinx. His the human head in order to possess speech. His the eagle's wings in order to scale the heights. His the bull's flanks in order to furrow the depths. His the lion's talons to make a way on the right and the left, before and behind. You, therefore, who seek initiation, are you learned as Faust? Are you insensible as Job? No, is it not so? But you may become like unto both if you choose. Have you overcome the vortices of vague thoughts? Are you without indecision or capriciousness? Do you consent to pleasure only when you will, and do you wish for it only when you should? No, is it not so? Not at least invariably, but this may come to pass if you choose. The Sphinx has not only a man's head, it has woman's breasts. Do you know how to resist feminine charms? No, is it not so? Then you laugh outright in replying, parading your moral weakness for the glorification of your physical and vital force. Be it so. I allow you to render this homage to the ass of Stern or Apuleius. The ass has its merit, I agree. It was consecrated to Priapus, as was the goat to the god of Mendes. But take it for what it is worth, and decide whether ass or man shall be master. He alone can possess truly the pleasure of love who has conquered the love of pleasure. To be able and to forbear is to be twice able. Woman enchains you by your desires. Master your desires, and you will enchain her. The greatest injury that can be inflicted on a man is to call him a coward. Now, what is a cowardly person? One who neglects his moral dignity in order to obey blindly the instincts of nature. As a fact, in the presence of danger, it is natural to be afraid and seek flight. Why then is it shameful? Because honor has erected it into a law that we must prefer our duty to our inclinations or fears. What is honor from this point of view? It is a universal presentience of immortality and appreciation of the means which can lead to it. The last trophy which a man can win from death is to triumph over the appetite for life, not by despair, but by a more exalted hope, which is contained in faith, for all that is noble and honest by the undivided consent of the world. To learn self-conquest is therefore to learn life, and the austerities of Stoicism were no vain parade of freedom. To yield to the forces of nature is to follow the stream of collective life and to be the slave of secondary causes. To resist and subdue nature is to make for oneself a personal and imperishable life. It is to break free from the vicissitudes of life and death. Every man who is prepared to die rather than renounce truth and justice is most truly living, for immortality abides in his soul. To find or to form such men was the end of all ancient initiations. Pythagoras disciplined his pupils by silence and all kinds of self-denial. Candidates in Egypt were tried by the four elements, and we know the self-inflicted austerities of fakirs and Brahmins in India for attaining the kingdom of free will and divine independence. All macerations of asceticism are borrowed from the initiations of the ancient mysteries. They have ceased because those qualified for initiation no longer finding initiators, and the leaders of conscience becoming in the lapse of time as uninstructed as the vulgar. The blind have grown weary of following the blind, and no one has cared to pass through ordeals the end of which was only in doubt and despair. The path of light was lost. To succeed in performing something, we must know that which it is proposed to do, or at least must have faith in someone who does know it. But shall I stake my life on a venture, or follow someone at chance who himself cannot see where he is going? We must not set out rashly along the path of the transcendental sciences, but once started we must reach the end or perish. To doubt is to lose one's reason. To pause is to fall. To recoil is to plunge into an abyss. You, therefore, who are undertaking the study of this book, if you persevere to the end and understand it, you will either be a monarch or madman. Do what you will with the volume, you will be unable to despise or to forget it. If you are pure, it will be your light. If strong, your arm. If holy, your religion. If wise, the rule of your wisdom. But if you are wicked, for you it will be an infernal torch. It will lacerate your breast like a poniard. It will rankle in your memory like a remorse. It will people your imagination with chimeras and will drive you through folly to despair. You will endeavor to laugh at it and will only gnash your teeth. It will be like the file in the fable which the serpent tried to bite but destroyed all of its teeth. Let us now enter on the series of initiations. I have said that revelation is the word. As a fact, the word or speech is the veil of being and the characteristic sign of life. Every form is the veil of a word because the idea, which is the mother of the word, is the sole reason for the existence of forms. Every figure is a character. Every character derives from and returns into a word. For this reason, the ancient sages, of whom Trismegistus is the organ, formulated their sole dogma in these terms. That which is above is like unto that which is below, and that which is below unto that which is above. In other words, the form is proportional to the idea. The shadow is the measure of the body calculated in its relation to the luminous ray. The scabbard is as deep as the sword is long. The negation is in proportion to the contrary affirmation. Production is equal to destruction in the movement which preserves life. And there is no point in infinite extension which may not be regarded as the center of a circle, having an expanding circumference receding indefinitely into space. Every individuality is therefore indefinitely perfectible, since the moral order is analogous to the physical, and since we cannot conceive any point as unable to dilate, increase, and radiate in a philosophically unlimited circle. What can be affirmed of the soul in its totality may be affirmed of each faculty of the soul. The intelligence and will of man are instruments of incalculable power and capacity, but intelligence and will possess as their helpmate and instrument a faculty which is too imperfectly known, the omnipotence of which belongs exclusively to the domain of magic. I speak of the imagination, which the Kabbalists term the diaphane or translucid. Imagination, in effect, is like the soul's eye. Therein forms are outlined and preserved. Thereby we behold the reflections of the invisible world. It is the glass of visions and the apparatus of magical life. By its intervention we heal diseases, modify the seasons, ward off death from the living, and raise the dead to life, because it is the imagination which exalts will and gives it power over the universal agent. Imagination determines the shape of the child in its mother's womb and decides the destiny of men. It lends wings to contagion and directs the arms of warfare. Are you exposed in battle? Believe yourself to be invulnerable like Achilles, and you will be so, says Paracelsus. Fear attracts bullets, but they are repelled by courage. It is well known that persons with amputated limbs feel pain in the vicinity of members which they possess no longer. Paracelsus operated upon living blood by medicating the product of a bleeding. He cured headache at a distance by treating hair cut from the patient. By the science of the theoretical unity and solidarity between all parts of the body, he anticipated and outstripped the theories, or rather experiences, of our most celebrated magnetists. Hence his cures were miraculous, and to his name of Philip Theophrastus Bombast he deserved the addition of Aurelius Paracelsus, with the further epithet of divine. Imagination is the instrument of the adaptation of the word. Imagination applied to reason is genius. Reason is one as genius is one in all the variety of its works. There is one principle, there is one truth, there is one reason, there is one absolute and universal philosophy. Whatsoever is subsists in unity, considered as beginning, and returns into unity, considered as end. One is in one, that is to say, all is in all. Unity is the principle of numbers. It is also the principle of motion and consequently of life. The entire human body is recapitulated in the unity of a single organ, which is the brain. All religions are summed up in the unity of a single dogma, which is the affirmation of being and its equality with itself, and this constitutes its mathematical value. There is only one dogma in magic, and it is this: the visible is the manifestation of the invisible, or in other terms, the perfect word in things appreciable and visible bears an exact proportion to the things which are inappreciable by our senses and unseen by our eyes. The magus raises one hand towards heaven and points down with the other to earth, saying, "Above immensity, below immensity still. Immensity equals immensity." This is true in things seen as in things unseen. The first letter in the alphabet of the sacred language, Aleph, represents a man extending one hand towards heaven and the other to the earth. It is an expression of the active principle in everything. It is creation in heaven corresponding to the omnipotence of the word below. This letter is a pantacle in itself, that is, a character expressing the universal science. It is supplementary to the sacred signs of the macrocosm and microcosm. It explains the Masonic double triangle and five-pointed blazing star, for the word is one, and revelation is one. By endowing man with reason, God gave him speech, and revelation, manifold in its forms, but one in its principle, consists entirely in the universal word, the interpreter of absolute reason. This is the significance of that term so much misconstrued, Catholicity, which in modern hieratic language means infallibility. The universal in reason is the absolute, and the absolute is the infallible. If absolute reason impelled universal society to believe irresistibly the utterance of a child, that child would be infallible by the ordination of God and of all humanity. Faith is nothing else but reasonable confidence in this unity of reason, and in this universality of the word. To believe is to place confidence in that which as yet we do not know, when reason assures us beforehand of ultimately knowing or at least recognizing it. Absurd are the so-called philosophers who cry, "I will never believe in a thing which I do not know." Shallow reasoners, if you knew, would you need to believe? But must I believe on chance and apart from reason? Certainly not. Blind and haphazard belief is superstition and folly. We may have faith in causes which reason compels us to admit on the evidence of effects known and appreciated by science. Science, great word and great problem. What is science? We shall answer in the second chapter of this book. The Pillars of the Temple. Chokma Domus Gnosis. Science is the absolute and complete possession of truth. Hence have the sages of all the centuries trembled before such an absolute and terrible word. They have hesitated in arrogating to themselves the first privilege of divinity by assuming the possession of science, and have been contented, instead of the verb to know, with that which expresses learning, while in place of the word science, they have adopted that of gnosis, which represents simply the notion of learning by intuition. What, in fact, does man know? Nothing, and at the same time he is allowed to ignore nothing. Devoid of knowledge, he is called upon to know all. Now, knowledge supposes the duad, a being who knows and an object known. The duad is the generator of society and of law. It is also the number of the gnosis. The duad is unity multiplying itself in order to create, and hence in sacred symbolism Eve issues from the inmost bosom of Adam. Adam is the human tetragram, summoned up by the mysterious Jod, type of the Kabbalistic phallus. By adding to this Jod, the triadic name of Eve, the name of Jehovah is formed, the divine tetragram, which is eminently the Kabbalistic and magical word, being that which the high priest in the temple pronounced Jod-Sheva. So unity, complete in the fruitfulness of the triad, forms therewith the tetrad, which is the key of all numbers, of all movements, and of all forms. By a revolution about its own center, the square produces a circle equal to itself, and this is the quadrature of the circle, the circular movement of four equal angles around the same point. That which is above equals that which is below, says Hermes. Here then is the duad serving as the measure of unity, and the relation of equality between above and below forms with these the triad. The creative principle is the ideal phallus. The created principle is the formal teis. The insertion of the vertical phallus into the horizontal teis forms the storos of the Gnostics, or the philosophical cross of Masons. Thus, the intersection of two produces four, which, by its movement, defines the circle with all degrees thereof. 1 is the principle, 2 is the word, A is the active, B is the passive. The monad is Boaz, the duad is Jachin. In the trigrams of Fohi, unity is the yang and the duad is the yin. Boaz and Jachin are the names of the two symbolical pillars before the principal entrance of Solomon's Kabbalistic temple. In the Kabbalah, these pillars explain all mysteries of antagonism, whether natural, political, or religious. They elucidate also the procreative struggle between man and woman, for according to the law of nature, the woman must resist the man, and he must entice or overcome her. The active principle seeks the passive principle. The plenum desires the void. The serpent's jaw attracts the serpent's tail, and in turning about upon himself, he at the same time flies and pursues himself. Woman is the creation of man, and universal creation is the bride of the first principle. When the Supreme Being became a creator, he erected a jod, or a phallus, and to provide a place in the fullness of the uncreated light, it was necessary to hollow out a teis, or trench of shadow, equivalent to the dimension determined by his creative desire, and attributed by him to the ideal jod of the radiating light. Such is the mysterious language of the Kabbalists and the Talmud, and on account of vulgar ignorance and malignity, it is impossible for us to explain or simplify it further. What then is creation? It is the house of the creative word. What is the teis? It is the house of the phallus. What is the nature of the active principle? To diffuse. What is that of the passive? To gather in and to fructify. What is man? He who initiates, who toils, who furrows, who sows. What is woman? She who forms, unites, irrigates, and harvests. Man wages war, woman brings peace about. Man destroys to create, woman builds up to preserve. Man is revolution, woman is conciliation. Man is the father of Cain, woman the mother of Abel. What also is wisdom? It is the agreement and union of two principles, the mildness of Abel directing the activity of Cain, man guided by the sweet inspirations of woman, debauchery conquered by lawful marriage, revolutionary energy softened and subdued by the gentleness of order and peace, pride subjugated by love, science acknowledging the inspirations of faith. It is then that science becomes wise and submits to the infallibility of universal reason, instructed by love or universal charity. Then it can assume the name of gnosis, because it knows at least that as yet it cannot boast of knowing perfectly. The monad can manifest only by the duad. Unity itself and the notion of unity at once constitute two. The unity of the macrocosm reveals itself by the two opposite points of two triangles. Human unity fulfills itself to right and left. Primitive man is androgynous. All organs of the human body are disposed in pairs, excepting the nose, the tongue, the umbilicus, and the Kabbalistic jod. Divinity, one in its essence, has two essential conditions as the fundamental grounds of its being: necessity and liberty. The laws of supreme reason necessitate and rule liberty in God, who is of necessity wise and reasonable. To make light visible, God had only to postulate shadow. To manifest the truth, he permitted the possibility of doubt. The shadow bodies forth the light, and the possibility of error is essential for the temporal manifestation of truth. If the buckler of Satan did not intercept the spear of Michael, the might of the angel would be lost in the void or manifested by infinite destruction launched below from above. Did not the heel of Michael restrain Satan in his ascent, Satan would dethrone God, or rather, he would lose himself in the abysses of the altitude. Hence, Satan is needful to Michael as the pedestal to the statue, and Michael is necessary to Satan as the brake to the locomotive. In analogical and universal dynamics, one leans only on that which resists. Furthermore, the universe is balanced by two forces which maintain it in equilibrium, being the force which attracts and that which repels. They exist alike in physics, in philosophy, and in religion. In physics they produce equilibrium, in philosophy criticism, in religion progressive revelation. The ancients represented this mystery by the conflict between Eros and Anteros, the struggle between Jacob and the angel, and by the equilibrium of the Golden Mountain, which gods on the one side and demons on the other encircle with the symbolic serpent of India. It is typified also by the caduceus of Hermanubis, by the two cherubim of the ark, by the twofold sphinx of the chariot of Osiris, and by the two seraphim, respectively black and white. Its scientific reality is demonstrated by the phenomena of polarity, as also by the universal law of sympathies and antipathies. The undiscerning disciples of Zoroaster divided the duad without referring it to unity, thus separating the pillars of the temple and endeavoring to have God. Conceive the absolute as two, and you must immediately conceive it as three to recover the unity principle. For this reason, the material elements analogous to the divine elements are understood firstly as four, explained as two, and exist ultimately as three. Revelation is the duad. Every word is double and supposes two. The ethic which results from revelation is founded on antagonism, and this results from the duad. Spirit and form attract and repel one another, like sign and idea, fiction and truth. Supreme reason necessitates dogma when communicating to finite intelligences, and dogma, by its passage from the domain of ideas to that of forms, participates in two worlds and has inevitably two senses testifying in succession, or simultaneously, that is, to the spirit and the flesh. So are there two forces in the moral region, one which attacks and one which restrains and expiates. They are represented in the mythos of Genesis by the typical personalities of Cain and Abel. Abel oppresses Cain by reason of his moral superiority. Cain, to get free, immortalizes his brother by slaying him and becomes the victim of his own crime. Cain could not suffer the life of Abel, and the blood of Abel suffers not the sleep of Cain. In the Gospel, the type of Cain is replaced by that of the prodigal son, whom his father forgives freely because he returns after having endured much. There is mercy and there is justice in God. To the just he dispenses justice, and to sinners mercy. In the soul of the world, which is the universal agent, there is a current of love and a current of wrath. This ambient and all-penetrating fluid, this ray loosened from the sun's splendor and fixed by the weight of the atmosphere and the power of central attraction. This body of the Holy Spirit, which we term the universal agent, while it was typified by the ancients under the symbol of a serpent devouring its tail. This electromagnetic ether, this vital and luminous caloric, is depicted in archaic monuments by the girdle of Isis, twice folded in a love knot round two poles, as well as by the serpent devouring its own tail, emblematic of prudence and of Saturn. Motion and life consist in the extreme tension of two forces. I would thou wert cold or hot, said the Master. As a fact, a great sinner is more really alive than is a tepid, effeminate man, and the fullness of his return to virtue will be in proportion to the extent of his errors. She who is destined to crush the serpent's head is intelligence, which ever rises above the stream of blind forces. The Kabbalists call her the Virgin of the Sea, whose dripping feet the infernal dragon crawls forward to lick with his fiery tongues, and they fall asleep in delight. Hereof are the hieratic mysteries of the duad, but there is one, and the last of all, which must not be made known. The reason, according to Hermes Trismegistus, being the malcomprehension of the vulgar, who would ascribe to the necessities of science the immoral aspect of blind fatality. By the year of the unknown must the crowd be restrained. He observes in another place, and Christ also said, Cast not your pearls before swine, lest trampling them under their feet, they turn and rend you. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil, of which the fruits are death, is the type of this hieratic secret of the duad, which would be only misconstrued if divulged, and would lead commonly to the unholy denial of free will, though it is the principle of moral life. It is hence in the essence of things that the revelation of this secret means death, and it is not at the same time the great secret of magic, but the arcanum of the duad leads up to that of the tetrad, or more correctly proceeds therefrom and is resolved by the triad, which contains the word of that enigma propounded by the Sphinx, the finding of which would have saved the life, atoned for the unconscious crime, and established the kingdom of Oedipus. In the hieroglyphic work of Hermes, being the tarot or book of Thoth, the duad is represented either by the horns of Isis, who has her head veiled and an open book concealed partially under her mantle, or otherwise by a sovereign lady, Juno, the Greek goddess, with one hand uplifted towards heaven and the other pointed to earth, as if formulating by this gesture the one and twofold dogma, which is the foundation of magic, and begins the marvelous symbols of the emerald table of Hermes. In the Apocalypse of St. John, there is reference to two witnesses or martyrs on whom prophetic tradition confers the names of Elias and Enoch. Elias, man of faith, enthusiasm, miracle. Enoch, one with him who is called Hermes by the Egyptians, honored by the Phoenicians as Cadmus, author of the sacred alphabet and the universal key to the initiations of the Logos, father of the Kabbalah. He who, according to sacred allegories, did not die like other men, but was translated to heaven and will return at the end of time. Much the same parable is told of St. John himself, who recovered and explained in his Apocalypse the symbolism of the word of Enoch. This resurrection of St. John and Enoch, expected at the close of the ages of ignorance, will be the renovation of their doctrine by the comprehension of the Kabbalistic keys which unlock the temple of unity and of universal philosophy, too long occult and reserved solely for the elect, who perish at the hands of the world. But we have said that the reproduction of the monad by the duad leads of necessity to the conception and dogma of the triad, so we come now to this great number which is the fullness and perfect word of unity. The Triangle of Solomon, Plenitudo Vocis Bina Physis. The perfect word is the triad because it supposes an intelligent principle, a speaking principle, and a principle spoken. The absolute revealed by speech endows this speech with a sense equivalent to itself, and in the understanding thereof creates its third self. So also the sun manifests by its light and proves or makes this manifestation efficacious by heat. The triad is delineated in space by the heavenly zenith, the infinite height connected with east and west by two straight diverging lines. With this visible triangle, reason compares another which is invisible, but is assumed to be equal in dimension. The abyss is its apex, and its reverse base is parallel to the horizontal line stretching from east to west. These two triangles combined in a single figure, which is the six-pointed star, form the sacred symbol of Solomon's seal, the resplendent star of the macrocosm. The notion of the infinite and the absolute is expressed by this sign, which is the grand pantacle, that is to say, the most simple and complete abridgment of the science of all things. Grammar itself attributes three persons to the verb. The first is that which speaks, the second that which is spoken to, and the third the object. In creating, the infinite prince speaks to himself of himself. Such is the explanation of the triad and the origin of the dogma of the Trinity. The magical dogma is also 1 in 3 and 3 in 1. That which is above is like or equal to that which is below. Thus, two things which resemble one another and the word which signifies their resemblance make three. The triad is the universal dogma. In magic, principle, realization, adaptation. In alchemy, azoth, incorporation, transmutation. In theology, God, incarnation, redemption in the human soul, thought, love, and action. In the family, father, mother, and child. The triad is the end and supreme expression of love. We seek one another as two only to become three. There are three intelligible worlds which correspond one with another by hierarchic analogy: the natural or physical, the spiritual or metaphysical, and the divine or religious worlds. From this principle follows the hierarchy of spirits, divided into three orders, and again subdivided by the triad in each of these. All these revelations are logical deductions from the first mathematical notions of being and number. Unity must multiply itself in order to become active. An indivisible, motionless, and sterile principle would be unity dead and incomprehensible. Were God only one, he would never be creator or father. Were he two, there would be antagonism or division in the infinite, which would mean the division also or death of all possible things. He is therefore three for the creation by himself, and in his image of the infinite multitude of beings and numbers. So is he truly one in himself and triple in our conception, which also leads us to behold him as triple in himself, and one in our intelligence and our love. This is a mystery for the faithful and a logical necessity for the initiate into absolute and real sciences. The word manifested by a life is realization or incarnation. The life of the word accomplishing its cyclic movement is adaptation or redemption. This triple dogma was known in all sanctuaries illuminated by the tradition of the sages. Do you wish to ascertain which is the true religion? Seek that which realizes most in the divine order, which humanizes God and makes man divine, which preserves the triadic dogma intact, which clothes the Word with flesh by making God manifest to the hands and eyes of the most ignorant, which in fine appeals to all in its doctrine and can adapt itself to all. The religion which is hierarchic and cyclic, having allegories and images for children, an exalted philosophy for grown men, sublime hopes and sweet consolations for the old. The primeval sages, when seeking the first of causes, behold good and evil in the world. They considered shadow and light. They compared winter with spring, age with youth, life with death, and their conclusion was this: the first cause is beneficent and severe. It gives and takes away life. Then are there two contrary principles, the one good and the other evil, exclaimed the disciples of Manes. No, the two principles of universal equilibrium are not contrary, although contrasted in appearance, for a singular wisdom opposes one to another. Good is on the right, evil on the left, but the supreme excellence is above both, applying evil to the victory of good and good to the amendment of evil. The principle of harmony is in unity, and it is this which imparts such power to the uneven number in magic. Now the most perfect of the odd numbers is 3 because it is the trilogy of unity. In the trigrams of Fohi, the superior triad is composed of 3 yang, or masculine figures, because nothing passive can be admitted into the idea of God, considered as the principle of production in the 3 worlds. For the same reason, the Christian Trinity by no means permits the personification of the Mother, who is shown forth implicitly in that of the Son. For the same reason also it is contrary to the laws of hieratic and orthodox symbology to personify the Holy Ghost under the form of a woman. Woman comes forth from man as nature comes forth from God. So Christ himself ascends to heaven and assumes the Virgin Mother. We speak of the ascension of the Savior and the assumption of the Mother of God. God, considered as Father, has nature for his daughter. As Son, he has the Virgin for his mother, and the Church for his bride. As Holy Spirit, he regenerates and fructifies humanity. Hence, in the trigrams of Fohi, the 3 inferior yin correspond to the 3 superior yang, for these trigrams constitute a pentacle like that of the 2 triangles of Solomon, but with a triadic interpretation of the 6 points of the blazing star. Dogma is only divine inasmuch as it is truly human. That is to say, insofar as it sums up the highest reason of humanity. So also the Master, whom we term the Man-God, called himself the Son of Man. Revelation is the expression of belief accepted and formulated by universal reason in the human word, on which account it is said that the divinity is human and the humanity divine in the man-God. We affirm all this philosophically, not theologically, without infringing in any way on the teaching of the Church, which condemns and must always condemn magic. Paracelsus and Agrippa did not set up altar against altar, but bowed to the ruling religion of their time, to the elect of science, the things of science, to the faithful, the things of faith. In his hymn to the royal son, the Emperor Julian gives a theory of the triad which is almost identical with that of the illuminated Swedenborg. The Son of the divine world is the infinite, spiritual, and uncreated light, which is verbalized, so to speak, in the philosophical world, and becomes the fountain of souls and of truth. Then it incorporates and becomes visible light in the Son of the third world, the central sun of our suns, of which the fixed stars are the ever-living sparks. The Kabbalists compare the spirit to a substance which remains fluid in the divine medium, and under the influence of the essential light, its exterior, however, becoming solidified like wax when exposed to air in the colder realms of reasoning or of visible forms. These shells, envelopes petrified or carnified, where such an expression possible, are the source of errors or of evil, which connects with the heaviness and hardness of animal envelopes. In the book Zohar and in that of the Revolution of Suk, perverse spirits or evil demons are never called otherwise than shells, cortices. The cortices of the world of spirits are transparent, while those of the material world are opaque. Bodies are only temporary shells whence souls have to be liberated, but those who in this life obey the flesh build up an interior body or fluidic shell, which after death becomes their prison house and torment, until the time arrives when they succeed in dissolving it in the warmth of the divine light, towards which, however, the burden of their grossness hinders them from ascending. Indeed, they can do so only after infinite struggles, and by the mediation of the just who stretch forth their hands towards them. During the whole period of the process they are devoured by the interior activity of the captive spirit, as in a burning furnace. Those who attain the pyre of expiation burn themselves thereon, like Hercules upon Mount Oeta, and so are delivered from their sufferings. But the courage of the majority fails before this ordeal, which seems to them a second death more appalling than the first, and so they remain in hell, which is rightly and actually eternal. But souls are never precipitated, nor even retained, despite themselves therein. The three worlds correspond together by means of the 32 paths of light, which are as steps of a sacred ladder. Every true thought corresponds to a divine grace in heaven and a good work on earth. Every grace of God manifests a truth and produces one or many acts reciprocally. Every act effects a truth or falsehood in the heavens, a grace or punishment. When a man pronounces the tetragram, say the Kabbalists, the 9 celestial realms sustain a shock, and then all the spirits cry out one upon another, "Who is it thus disturbing the kingdom of heaven?" Then does the earth communicate unto the first sphere the sins of that rash being who takes the eternal name in vain, and the accusing word is transmitted from circle to circle, from star to star, and from hierarchy to hierarchy. Every utterance possesses 3 senses, every act has a triple range, every form a triple idea, for the absolute corresponds from world to world by its forms. Every determination of human will modifies nature, concerns philosophy, and is written in heaven. There are consequently 2 fatalities, one resulting from the uncreated will in harmony with its proper wisdom, the other from created wills in accordance with the necessity of secondary causes in their correspondence with the first cause. There is hence nothing indifferent in life, and our seeming most simple resolutions do often determine an incalculable series of benefits or evils, above all in the affinities of our diaphany with the great magical agent, as we shall explain elsewhere. The triad being the fundamental principle of the whole Kabbalah, or sacred tradition of our fathers, was necessarily the fundamental dogma of Christianity, the apparent dualism of which it explains by the intervention of a harmonious and all-powerful unity. Christ did not put his teaching into writing, and only revealed it in secret to his favored disciple, the one Kabbalist, and he a great Kabbalist among the apostles. So is the Apocalypse the book of the Gnosis, or secret doctrine of the first Christians, and the key of this doctrine is indicated by an occult versicle of the Lord's Prayer, which the Vulgate leaves untranslated, while in the Greek Rite, which preserves the traditions of St. John, the priests only are permitted to pronounce it. This versicle, completely Kabbalistic, is found in the Greek text of the Gospel according to St. Matthew, and in several Hebrew copies as follows. The sacred word Malkuth, substituted for Kitover, which is its Kabbalistic correspondent, and the equipoise of Geburah and Chesed, repeating itself in the circles of heavens called eons by the Gnostics, provided the keystone of the whole Christian temple in this occult versicle. It has been retained by Protestants in their New Testament, but they have failed to discern its lofty and wonderful meaning, which would have unveiled to them all the mysteries of the Apocalypse. There is, however, a tradition in the Church that the manifestation of these mysteries is reserved till the last times. Malkuth, based upon Geburah and Chesed, is the temple of Solomon, having Jachin and Boaz for its pillars. It is Adamite dogma, founded for the one part on the resignation of Abel, and for the other on the labors and self-reproach of Cain. It is the equilibrium of being established on necessity and liberty, stability and motion. It is the demonstration of the universal lever sought in vain by Archimedes, a scholar whose talents were employed in the culture of obscurity, who died without seeking to be understood, resolved this supreme equation, discovered by him in the Kabbalah, and was in dread of its source transpiring if he expressed himself more clearly. We have seen one of his disciples and admirers most indignant, perhaps in good faith, at the suggestion that his master was a Kabbalist, but we can state, notwithstanding to the glory of the same learned man, that his researches have shortened appreciably our work on the occult sciences, and that the key of the transcendent Kabbalah above all indicated in the arcane versicle cited above has been applied skillfully to an absolute reform of all sciences in the books of Hohenrodsky. The secret virtue of the Gospels is therefore contained in 3 words, and these 3 words have established 3 dogmas and 3 hierarchies. All science reposes upon 3 principles as the syllogism upon 3 terms. There are also 3 distinct classes, or 3 original and natural ranks among men, who are called to advance from the lower to the higher. The Jews term these 3 series or degrees in the progress of spirits, Asaya, Yetzirah, and Briah. The Gnostics, who were Christian Kabbalists, call them Heil, Psyche, and Gnosis. By the Jews, the supreme circle was named Atziluth, and by the Gnostics, Pleroma. In the tetragram, the triad, taken at the beginning of the word, expresses the divine copulation. Taken at the end, it expressed the female and maternity. Eve has a name of 3 letters, but the primitive Adam is signified simply by the letter Jod, whence Jehovah should be pronounced Java, and this point leads us to the great and supreme mystery of magic embodied in the tetrad. The tetragram. Geburah Chesed Porta Libarum Elementa. In nature, there are 2 forces producing equilibrium, and these 3 constitute a single law. Here then is the triad resumed in unity, and by adding the conception of unity to that of the triad, we are brought to the tetrad, the first square and perfect number, the source of all numerical combinations and the principle of all forms. Affirmation, negation, discussion, solution. Such are the 4 philosophical operations of the human mind. Discussion conciliates negation with affirmation by rendering them necessary to each other. In the same way, the philosophical triad, emanating from the antagonism of the duad, is completed by the tetrad, the 4-square basis of all truth. According to consecrated dogma, there are three persons in God, and these three constitute one only deity. Three and one provide the conception of four, because unity is required to explain the three. Hence, in almost all languages, the name of God consists of four letters, and in Hebrew these four are really three, one of them being repeated twice, that which expresses the word and the creation of the word. Two affirmations make two corresponding denials either possible or necessary. The fact of being is affirmed, and that of nothingness is denied. Affirmation as word produces affirmation as realization or incarnation of the word, and each of these affirmations corresponds to the denial of its opposite. Thus, in the opinion of the Kabbalists, the name of the demon or of evil is composed of the same letters as the name of God or goodness, but spelled backwards. This evil is the lost reflection or imperfect mirage of light and shadow, but all which exists, whether of good or evil, of light or darkness, exists and manifests by the tetrad. The affirmation of unity supposes the number four, unless it turns in unity itself as in a vicious circle. So also the triad, as we have observed already, is explained by the duad and resolved by the tetrad, which is the squared unity of even numbers and the quadrangular base of the cube, regarded as unity of construction, solidity, and measure. The Kabbalistic tetragram, Jodheva, expresses God in humanity and humanity in God. The four astronomical cardinal points are, relatively to us, the yea and the nay of light, east and west, and the yea and nay of warmth, south and north. As we have said already, according to the sole dogma of the Kabbalah, that which is in visible nature reveals that which is in the domain of invisible nature, or secondary causes are in strict proportion and analogous to the manifestations of the first cause. So is this first cause revealed invariably by the cross, that unity made up of two, divided one by the other in order to produce four, that key to the mysteries of India and Egypt, the Tao of the Patriarchs, the divine sign of Osiris, the Storos of the Gnostics, the keystone of the temple, the symbol of occult masonry, the cross, central point of the junction of the right angles of two infinite triangles, the cross which in the French language seems to be the first root and fundamental substantive of the verb to believe and the verb to grow, thus combining the conceptions of science, religion, and progress. The great magical agent manifests by four kinds of phenomena and has been subjected to the experiments of profane science under four names: caloric, light, electricity, magnetism. It has received also the names of tetragram, Inri, Azoth, ether, Od, magnetic fluid, soul of the earth, Lucifer, etc. The great magical agent is the fourth emanation of the life principle, of which the sun is the third form. See the initiates of the school of Alexandria and the dogma of Hermes Trismegistus. In this way, the eye of the world, as the ancients called it, is the mirage of the reflection of God, and the soul of the earth is a permanent glance of the sun which the earth conceives and guards by impregnation. The moon concurs in this impregnation of the earth by reflecting a solar image during the night, so that Hermes was right when he said of the great agent, "The sun is its father, the moon its mother." Then he adds, "The wind has borne it in the belly thereof," because the atmosphere is the recipient, and, as it were, the crucible of the solar rays, by means of which there forms that living image of the sun which penetrates the whole earth, fructifies it, and determines all that is produced on its surface by its emanations and permanent currents analogous to those of the sun itself. This solar agent subsists by two contrary forces, one of attraction and one of projection, whence Hermes says that it ascends and descends eternally. The force of attraction is always fixed at the center of bodies, that of projection in their outlines or at their surface. By this dual force all is created and all preserved. Its motion is a rolling up and an unrolling which are successive and unlimited, or rather simultaneous and perpetual, by spirals of opposite movements which never meet. It is the same movement as that of the sun, at once attracting and repelling all the planets of its system. To be acquainted with the movement of this terrestrial sun in such a manner as to be able to apply its currents and direct them is to have accomplished the great work and to be master of the world. Armed with such a force, you may make yourself adored. The crowd will believe that you are God. The absolute secret of this direction has been in the possession of certain men, and can yet be discovered. It is the great magical arcanum, depending on an incommunicable axiom and on an instrument which is the grand and unique athanor of the highest grade of Hermetists. The incommunicable axiom is enclosed Kabbalistically in the 4 letters of the tetragram, arranged in the following manner. In the letters of the words Azoth and Inri written Kabbalistically, and in the monogram of Christ as embroidered on the laverum, which the Kabbalist postal interprets by the word Rhoda. Hence, the adepts have formed their tarot or tarot, by the repetition of the first letter, thus indicating the circle and suggesting that the word is read backwards. All magical science is comprised in the knowledge of this secret. To know it and have the courage to use it is human omnipotence. To reveal it to a profane person is to lose it. To reveal it even to a disciple is to abdicate in favor of that disciple, who henceforward possesses the right of life and death over his master. I am speaking from the magical standpoint, and will certainly slay him for fear of dying himself. But this has nothing in common with deeds qualified as murder in criminal legislation. The practical philosophy, which is the basis and point of departure for our laws, does not recognize the facts of bewitchment and of occult influences. We touch here upon extraordinary revelations and are prepared for the unbelief and derision of incredulous fanaticism. Voltairean religion has also its fanatics, hate the great shades who must now be lurking sullenly in the vaults of the Pantheon, while Catholicism, strong ever in its practices and prestige, chants the office overhead. The perfect word, that which is adequate to the thought which it expresses, always contains virtually or supposes a tetrad, the idea with its 3 necessary and correlated forms, then the image of the thing expressed, with the 3 terms of the judgment which qualifies it. When I say being exists, I affirm implicitly that the void is non-existent. A height, a breadth which the height subdivides longitudinally, a depth separated from the height by the intersection of the breadth, such is the natural tetrad, composed of 2 lines at right angles, one to another. Nature has also 4 motions, products of 2 forces which sustain each other by their tendency in an opposite direction. Now the law which rules bodies is analogous to that which governs minds, and that which governs minds is the very manifestation of God's secret, that is to say, of the mystery of the creation. Imagine a watch having 2 parallel springs with an engagement which makes them work in an opposite direction, so that the one in unwinding winds up the other. In this way the watch will wind up itself, and you will have discovered perpetual motion. The engagement should be at 2 ends and of extreme accuracy. Is this beyond attainment? We think not. But when it is discovered, the inventor will understand by analogy all the secrets of nature, progress in direct proportion to resistance. The absolute movement of life is thus the perpetual consequence of 2 contrary tendencies which are never opposed. When one seems to yield to the other, it is like a spring which is winding up, and you may expect a reaction, the moment and characteristics of which it is quite possible to foresee and determine. Hence, at the period of the greatest Christian fervor was the reign of Antichrist known and predicted. But Antichrist will prepare and determine the second advent and final triumph of the man-God. This again is a rigorous and Kabbalistical conclusion contained in the gospel premises. Hence, the Christian prophecy comprises a 4-fold revelation. 1. Fall of the old world and triumph of the gospel under the first advent. 2. Great apostasy and coming of Antichrist. 3. Fall of Antichrist and recurrence to Christian ideas. 4. Definitive triumph of the gospel, or second advent, designated under the name of the Last Judgment. This fourfold prophecy contains, as will be seen, two affirmations and two negations, the idea of two ruins or universal deaths and of two resurrections. For to every conception which appears upon the social horizon in east and a west, a zenith and a nadir may be ascribed without fear of error. Thus is the philosophical cross the key of prophecy, and all gates of science may be opened with the pantacle of Ezekiel, the center of which is a star formed by the interlacement of two crosses. Does not human life present itself also under these four phases or successive transformations: birth, life, death, immortality? And remark here that the immortality of the soul, necessitated as a completement of the tetrad, is kabbalistically proved by analogy, which is the sole dogma of truly universal religion, as it is the key of science and the universal law of nature. As a fact, death can be no more an absolute end than birth is a real beginning. Birth proves the pre-existence of the human being, since nothing is produced from nothing, and death proves immortality, since being can no more cease from being than nothingness can cease to be nothingness. Being and nothingness are two absolutely irreconcilable ideas, with this difference that the idea of nothingness, which is altogether negative, issues from the very idea of being, whence even nothingness cannot be understood as an absolute negation, whilst the notion of being can never be put in comparison with that of nothingness, and still less can it come forth therefrom. To say that the world has been produced out of nothing is to advance a monstrous absurdity. All that is proceeds from what has been, and consequently nothing that is can evermore cease to be. The succession of forms is produced by the alternatives of movement. They are the phenomena of life which replace without destroying one another. All things change, nothing perishes. The sun does not die when it vanishes from the horizon. Even the most fluidic forms are immortal, subsisting always in the permanence of their raison d'etre, which is the combination of light with the aggregated potencies of the molecules of the first substance. Hence they are preserved in the astral fluid, and can be evoked and reproduced according to the will of the sage, as we shall see when treating of second sight and the evocation of memories in necromancy or other magical works. We shall return also to the great magical agent in the 4th chapter of the ritual, where we shall complete our indications of the characteristics of the great arcanum, and of the means of recovering this tremendous power. Here let us add a few words on the 4 magical elements and elementary spirits. The magical elements are, in alchemy, salt, sulfur, mercury, and azoth. In Kabbalah, the macroprosopis, the microprosopis, and the 2 mothers. In hieroglyphics, the man, eagle, lion, and bull. In old physics, according to vulgar names and notions, air, water, earth, and fire. But in magical science we know that water is not ordinary water, fire is not simply fire, etc. These expressions conceal a more recondite meaning. Modern science has decomposed the 4 elements of the ancients and reduced them to a number of so-called simple bodies. That which is simple, however, is the primitive substance, properly so called. There is thus only one material element which manifests always by the tetrad in its forms. We shall therefore preserve the wise distinction of elementary appearances admitted by the ancients, and shall recognize air, fire, earth, and water as the 4 positive and visible elements of magic. The subtle and the gross, the swift and slow solvent, or the instruments of heat and cold, constitute in occult physics the 2 positive and negative principles of the tetrad, and should be thus tabulated. Thus, air and earth represent the male principle. Fire and water are referable to the female principle, since the philosophical cross of pentacles, as affirmed already, is a primitive and elementary hieroglyph of the lingam of the gymnosophists. To these 4 elementary forms correspond the 4 following philosophical ideas: spirit, matter, motion, rest. As a fact, all science is comprised in the understanding of these 4 things, which alchemy has reduced to 3: the absolute, the fixed and the volatile, referred by the Kabbalah to the essential idea of God, who is absolute reason, necessity, and liberty, a threefold notion expressed in the occult books of the Hebrews. Under the names of Kether, Chokmah, and Bina for the divine world, of Tifereth, Chesed, and Geburah in the moral world, and of Jesod, Hod, and Netzah in the physical world, which, together with the moral, is contained in the idea of the kingdom or Malkuth. We shall explain in the 10th chapter this theogony as rational as it is sublime. Now, created spirits, being called to emancipation by trial, are placed from their birth between these four forces, two positive and two negative, and have it in their power to affirm or deny good, to choose life or death, to discover the fixed point, that is, the moral center of the cross, is the first problem which is given them to resolve. Their initial conquest must be that of their own liberty. They begin by being drawn, some to the north, others to the south, some to the right, others to the left, and in so far as they are not free, they cannot have the use of reason, nor can they take flesh otherwise than in animal forms. These unemancipated spirits, slaves of the four elements, are those which the Kabbalists call elementary daimons, and they people the elements which correspond to their state of servitude. Sylphs, undines, gnomes, and salamanders really exist, therefore, some wandering and seeking incarnation, others incarnate and living on this earth. These are vicious and imperfect men. We shall return to this subject in the 15th chapter, which treats of enchantments and demons. That is also an occult tradition by which the ancients were led to admit the existence of four ages in the world, only it was not made known to the vulgar that these ages are successive and are renewed, like the four seasons of the year. Thus, the golden age has passed, and it is yet to come. This, however, belongs to the spirit of prophecy, in which chapter, which is concerned with the initiate and the seer. If we now add the idea of unity to the tetrad, we shall have, together and separately, the conceptions of the divine synthesis and analysis, the God of the initiates and that of the profane. Here the doctrine becomes more popular as it passes from the domain of the abstract. The grand Hierophant intervenes. The pentagram. Geburah Ecce. Hereunto we have exposed the magical dogma in its more arid and abstruse phases. Now the enchantments begin. Now we can proclaim wonders and reveal most secret things. The pentagram signifies the domination of the mind over the elements, and the demons of air, the spirits of fire, the phantoms of water, and ghosts of earth are chained by this sign. Equipped therewith and suitably disposed, you may behold the infinite through the medium of that faculty which is like the soul's eye, and you will be ministered unto by legions of angels and hosts of fiends. But here, in the first place, let us establish certain principles. There is no invisible world. There are, however, many degrees of perfection in organs. The body is the coarse and, as it were, the perishable cortex of the soul. The soul can perceive of itself, and independently of the mediation of physical organs, by means of its sensibility and its diaphany, the things, both spiritual and corporeal, which are existent in the universe. Spiritual and corporeal are simply terms which express the degrees of tenuity or density in substance. What is called the imagination within us is only the soul's inherent faculty of assimilating the images and reflections contained in the living light, being the great magnetic agent. Such images and reflections are revelations when science intervenes to reveal us their body or light. The man of genius differs from the dreamer and the fool in this only, that his creations are analogous to truth, while those of the fool and the dreamer are lost reflections and bewrayed images. Hence, for the wise man to imagine is to see, as for the magician to speak is to create. It follows that by means of the imagination, demons and spirits can be beheld really and in truth, but the imagination of the adept is diaphanous, whilst that of the crowd is opaque. The light of truth traverses the one as ordinary light passes through clear glass, and is refracted by the other as when ordinary light impinges upon a vitreous block, full of scoriae and foreign matter. That which most contributes to the errors of the vulgar is the reflection of depraved imaginations, one in the other. But in virtue of positive science, the seer knows that what he imagines is true, and the event invariably confirms his vision. We shall state in the ritual after what manner this lucidity can be acquired. It is by means of this light that static visionaries place themselves in communication with all worlds, as so frequently occurred to Swedenborg, who notwithstanding was imperfectly lucid, seeing that he did not distinguish reflections from rays, and often intermingled chimerical fancies with his most admirable dreams. We say dreams because dream is the consequence of a natural and periodical ecstasy which we term sleep. To be in ecstasy is to sleep. Magnetic somnambulism is a production and direction of ecstasy. The errors which occur therein are occasioned by reflections from the diaphany of waking persons, and above all of the magnetizer. Dream is vision produced by the refraction of a ray of truth. Chimerical fantasy is hallucination occasioned by a reflection. The temptation of St. Anthony with its nightmares and its monsters represents the confusion of reflections with direct rays. So long as the soul struggles, it is reasonable. When it yields to this species of invading intoxication, it becomes mad. To disentangle the direct ray and separate it from the reflection, such is the work of the initiate. Here let us state distinctly that this work is being performed continually in the world by some of the flower of mankind, that there is hence a permanent revelation by intuition, and that there is no insuperable barrier which separates souls, because there are no sudden interruptions and no high walls in nature by which minds can be divided from one another. All is transition and blending, wherefore, assuming the perfectibility, if not infinite, at least indefinite, of human faculties, it will be understood that every person can attain to see all, and therefore to know all. There is no void in nature. All is peopled. There is no true death in nature. All is alive. Seest thou that star? Asked Napoleon of Cardinal Fesch. No, sire. I see it, said the emperor, and he most certainly did. When great men are accused of superstition, it is because they behold what remains unseen by the crowd. Men of genius differ from simple seers by their faculty of communicating sensibly to others that which they themselves perceive, and of making themselves believe by the force of enthusiasm and sympathy. Such persons are the media of the divine word. Let us now specify the manner in which visions operate. All forms correspond to ideas, and there is no idea which has not its proper and peculiar form. The primordial light, which is the vehicle of all ideas, is the mother of all forms, and transmits them from emanation to emanation, merely diminished or modified according to the density of the media. Secondary forms are reflections which return to the font of the emanated light. The forms of objects, being a modification of light, remain in the light where the reflection consigns them. Hence the astral light or terrestrial fluid, which we call the great magnetic agent, is saturated with all kinds of images or reflections. Now our soul can evoke these, and subject them to its diaphany, as the Kabbalists term it. Such images are always present before us, and are effaced only by the more powerful impressions of reality during waking hours, or by preoccupation of the mind, which makes our imagination inattentive to the fluidic panorama of the astral light. When we sleep, this spectacle presents itself spontaneously before us, and in this way dreams are produced. Dreams vague and incoherent if some governing will do not remain active during the sleep, giving even unconsciously to our intelligence a direction to the dream, which then transforms into vision. Animal magnetism is nothing but an artificial sleep produced by the voluntary or enforced union of two wills, one of which is awake while the other slumbers. That is, one of which directs the other in the choice of reflections for the transformation of dreams into visions and the attainment of truth by means of images. Thus, somnambulists do not actually travel to the place where they are sent by the magnetizer. They evoke its images in the astral light and can behold nothing which does not exist in that light. The astral light has a direct action on the nerves, which are its conductors in the animal economy, transmitting it to the brain. It follows that in a state of somnambulism, it is possible to see by means of the nerves without being dependent on radiant light, the astral fluid being a latent light, in the same way that physics recognize the existence of a latent caloric. Magnetism between two persons is certainly a wonderful discovery, but the magnetizing of a person by himself, awakening his own lucidity and directing it himself at will, is the perfection of magical art. The secret of this great work does not remain for discovery. It has been known and practiced by a great number of initiates, above all by the celebrated Apollonius of Tyana, who has left a theory concerning it, as we shall see in the ritual. The secret of magnetic lucidity and the direction of the phenomena of magnetism depend on two things: agreement of minds and complete union of wills, in a direction which is possible and determined by science. This is for the operation of magnetism between two or more persons. Solitary magnetism requires preparations of which we have spoken in our initial chapter, when enumerating and establishing in all their difficulty the essential qualities of a veritable adept. In the following chapters we shall elucidate further this important and fundamental point. The empire of will over the astral light, which is the physical soul of the four elements, is represented in magic by the pentagram, placed at the head of this chapter. The elementary spirits are subservient to this sign when employed with understanding, and by placing it in the circle or on the table of evocations, they can be rendered tractable, which is magically called their imprisonment. Let us explain this marvel briefly. All created beings communicate with one another by signs, and all adhere to a certain number of truths expressed by determinate forms. The perfection of forms increases in proportion to the emancipation of spirits, and those that are not overweighted by the chains of matter recognize by intuition out of hand whether a sign is the expression of a real power or of a precipitate will. The intelligence of the wise man therefore gives value to his pantacle, as science gives weight to his will, and spirits comprehend this power immediately. Thus, by means of the pentagram, spirits can be forced to appear in vision, whether in the waking or sleeping state, by themselves leading before our diaphany their reflection, which exists in the astral light if they have lived, or a reflection analogous to their spiritual logos if they have not lived on earth. This explains all visions and accounts for the dead invariably appearing to seers, either such as they were upon earth or such as they are in the grave, never as they subsist in a condition which escapes the perceptions of our actual organism. Pregnant women are influenced more than others by the astral light, which concurs in the formation of the child and offers them incessant reminiscences of the forms that abound therein. This explains how it is that women of the highest virtue deceive the malignity of observers by equivocal resemblances. On the fruit of their marriage they impress frequently an image which has struck them in dream, and it is thus that the same physiognomies are perpetuated from generation to generation. The Kabbalistic usage of the pentagram can determine therefore the appearance of the unborn children, and an initiated woman might endow her son with the characteristics of Nero or Achilles, with those of Louis XIV or Napoleon. We shall indicate the method in our ritual. The pentagram is called in Kabbalah the sign of the microcosm, that sign so exalted by Goethe in the beautiful monologue of Faust. Ah, how do all my senses leap at this sight! I feel the young and sacred pleasure of life quivering in my nerves and veins. Was it a god who traced this sign which stills the vertigo of my soul, fills my poor heart with joy, and in a mysterious rapture unveils the forces of nature around me? Am I myself a god? All is so clear to me. I behold in these simple lines the revelation of active nature to my soul. I realize for the first time the truth of the wise man's words. The world of spirits is not closed. Thy sense is obtuse, thy heart is dead. Arise, bathe, O adept of science, thy breast still enveloped by an earthly veil in the splendors of the dawning day. Faust, Part 1. Scene 1. On 24th of July in the year 1854, the author of this book, Eliphas Levi, made an experiment of evocation with the pentagram, after due preparation according to all the ceremonies indicated in the 13th chapter of the ritual. The success of this experiment, details of which, as regard its principles, will be found in the corresponding chapter of the present doctrinal part, establishes a new pathological fact, which men of true science will admit without difficulty. The experience, repeated even to a third time, gave results truly extraordinary, but positive and unmixed with hallucination. We invite skeptics to make a conscientious and intelligent trial on their own part before shrugging their shoulders and smiling. The figure of the pentagram, completed in accordance with science and used by the author in his experiment, is that which is found at the head of this chapter, and it is more perfect than any in the keys of Solomon or in the magical calendars of Tycho Brahe and Duquesnoy. We must remark, however, that the use of the pentagram is most dangerous for operators who are not in possession of its complete and perfect understanding. The direction of the points of the star is in no sense arbitrary, and may change the entire character of an operation, as we shall explain in the ritual. Paracelsus, that innovator in magic, who surpassed all other initiates in his unaided practical success, affirms that every magical figure and every Kabbalistic sign of the pentacles which compel spirits may be reduced to two, which are the synthesis of all the others. These are the sign of the macrocosm or the seal of Solomon, the form of which we have given already, and that of the microcosm more potent even than the first. That is to say, the pentagram, of which he provides a most minute description in his occult philosophy. If it be asked how a sign can exercise so much power over spirits, we inquire in return why the whole Christian world bows down before that sign of the cross. The sign is nothing by itself, and has no force apart from the doctrine of which it is the summary and the logos. Now, a sign which summarizes in their expression all the occult forces of nature, a sign which has ever exhibited to elementary spirits and others a power greater than their own, fills them naturally with respect and fear, enforcing their obedience by the empire of science and of will over ignorance and weakness. By the pentagram also is measured the exact proportions of the great and unique athanor necessary to the confection of the philosophical stone and the accomplishment of the great work. The most perfect alembic in which the quintessence can be elaborated is conformable to this figure, and the quintessence itself is represented by the sign of the pentagram. Magical equilibrium. Tifereth uncus. Supreme intelligence is necessarily reasonable. God in philosophy may be only a hypothesis, but he is a hypothesis imposed by good sense on human reason. To personify the absolute reason is to determine the divine ideal. Necessity, liberty, and reason. These are the great and supreme triangle of the Kabbalists who name reason Kitover, necessity Chokmah, and liberty Bina, in their first or divine triad. Fatality, will, and power, such is the magical triad, which corresponds in things human to the divine triad. Fatality is the inevitable sequence of effects and causes in a determined order. Will is the directing faculty of intelligent forces for the conciliation of the liberty of persons with the necessity of things. Power is the wise application of will which enlists fatality itself in the accomplishment of the desires of the sage. When Moses smote the rock, he did not create the spring of water. He revealed it to the people because occult science had made it known to himself by means of the divining rod. It is in like manner with all miracles of magic. A law exists which is ignored by the vulgar and made use of by the initiate. Occult laws are often opposed diametrically to common ideas. For example, the crowd believes in the sympathy of things which are alike and in the hostility of things contrary, but it is the opposite which is the true law. It used to be affirmed that nature abhors the void, but it should be said that nature desires it, were the void not, in physics, the most irrational of fictions. In all things the vulgar mind habitually takes shadow for reality, turns its back upon light, and is reflected in the obscurity which it projects itself. The forces of nature are at the disposal of one who knows how to resist them. Are you master sufficiently of yourself to never be intoxicated? Then will you direct the terrible and fatal power of intoxication. If you would make others drunk, possess them with the desire of drink, but do not partake of it yourself. That man will dispose of the love of others who is master of his own. If you would possess, do not give. The world is magnetized by the light of the sun, and we are magnetized by the astral light of the world. That which operates in the body of the planet repeats itself in us. Within us there are three analogical and hierarchic worlds, as in all nature. Man is the microcosm or little world, and according to the doctrine of analogies, whatsoever is in the great world is reproduced in the small. Hence we have three centers of fluidic attraction and projection: the brain, the heart or epigastric region, and the genital organ. Each of these instruments is one and twofold. In other words, we find the suggestion of the triad therein. Each attracts on one side and repels on the other. It is by means of such apparatus that we place ourselves in communication with the universal fluid supplied to us by the nervous system. These three centers are, moreover, the seat of a triple magnetic operation, as we shall explain elsewhere. When the magus has attained lucidity, whether through the mediation of a pythoness or by his own development, he communicates and directs at will the magnetic vibrations in the whole mass of the astral light, the currents of which he divines by means of the magic wand, which is a perfected divining rod. By the aid of these vibrations, he influences the nervous system of persons made subject to his action, accelerates or suspends the currents of life, soothes or tortures, heals or hurts, in fine, slays or brings to life. Here, however, we pause in presence of the smile of incredulity. Let us permit it to enjoy the easy triumph of denying what it does not know. We shall demonstrate later on that death is preceded always by a lethargic sleep, and hence takes place gradually, that resurrection is possible in certain cases, that lethargy is a real but uncompleted death, and that the final paroxysm is in many cases subsequent to inhumation. This, however, is not the subject of the present chapter. We affirm now that a lucid will can act upon the mass of the astral light, and in concurrence with other wills which it absorbs and draws along, can determine great and irresistible currents. We say also that the astral light condenses or rarefies in proportion as currents accumulate, more or less at certain centers. When it is deficient in the energy required for the support of life, diseases accompanied by sudden decomposition follow, of a kind which baffle physicians. There is no other cause, for example, in the case of cholera morbus, and the swarms of animalculae observed or supposed by some specialists may be the effect rather than the cause. Cholera should be treated therefore by insufflation, did not the operator thereby run the chance of an exchange with the patient which would be very formidable for himself. Every intelligent effort of will is a projection of the human fluid or light, and here it is needful to distinguish the human from the astral light, and animal from universal magnetism. In making use of the word fluid, we employ an accepted expression, and seek to be understood in this manner, but we are far from deciding that the latent light is a fluid. Everything prompts us, on the contrary, to prefer the system of vibrations in the explanation of this phenomenal subject. However it may be, the light in question, being the instrument of life, cleaves naturally to all living centers, attaches itself to the nucleus of planets, even as to the heart of man, and by the heart we understand magically the great sympathetic, identifying itself with the individual life of the being which it animates, and it is by this quality of sympathetic assimilation that it is distributed without confusion. Hence it is terrestrial in its affinity with the sphere of the earth, and human exclusively in its affinity with men. It is for this reason that electricity, caloric, light, and magnetism, produced by ordinary physical means, not only do not originate, but tend rather to neutralize the effects of animal magnetism. The astral light, subordinated to a blind mechanism and proceeding from arbitrary automatic centers, is a dead light and works mathematically, following given impulsions or fatal laws. The human light is fatal only to the ignorant, performing chance experiments. In the seer, it is subjected to intelligence, submitted to imagination, and dependent on will. This light, continually projected by the will, constitutes the personal atmospheres of Swedenborg. The body absorbs what environs it and radiates perpetually by projecting its influences and invisible molecules. It is the same with the spirit, so that this phenomenon, by some mystics termed respiration, has really the influence, both physical and moral, which is assigned to it. It is undoubtedly contagious to breathe the same air as diseased persons, and to be within the circle of attraction and expansion which surrounds the wicked. When the magnetic atmosphere of two persons is so equilibrated that the attractive faculty of one draws the expansive faculty of the other, a tendency is produced which is termed sympathy. Then imagination, calling up to it all the rays or reflections analogous to that which it experiences, makes a poem of the desires which captivate will, and if the persons differ in sex, it occasions in them, or more commonly in the weaker of the two, the complete intoxication of the astral light, which is termed passion par excellence, or love. Love is one of the great instruments of magical power, but it is categorically forbidden to the magus, at least as an intoxication or passion. Woe to the Samson of the Kabbalah if he permit himself to be put asleep by Delilah. The Hercules of science, who exchanges his royal scepter for the distaff of Omphale, will soon experience the vengeance of Deianira, and nothing will be left for him but the pyre of Mount Oeta, in order to escape the devouring folds of the coat of Nasus. Sexual love is ever an illusion, for it is the result of an imaginary mirage. The astral light is the universal seducer, typified by the serpent of Genesis. This subtle agent, ever active, ever vigorous, ever fruitful in alluring dreams and sensuous images. This force, which of itself is blind and subordinated to every will, whether for good or evil. This ever-renewing circulus of unbridled life, which produces vertigo in the imprudent. This corporeal spirit, this fiery body, this impalpable omnipresent ether, this monstrous seduction of nature. How shall we define it comprehensively, and how characterize its action? To some extent indifferent in itself, it lends itself to good as to evil. It transmits light and propagates darkness. It may be called equally Lucifer and Lucifuge. It is a serpent, but it is also an oriole. It is a fire, but it may belong equally to the torments of Infernus or the sacrifice of incense offered up to heaven. To dispose of it, we must, like the predestined woman, set our foot upon its head. In the elementary world, water corresponds to the Kabbalistic woman and fire to the serpent. To subdue the serpent, that is, to govern the circle of the astral light, we must place ourselves outside its currents. In other words, we must isolate ourselves. For this reason, Apollonius of Tyana wrapped himself completely in a mantle of fine wool, setting his feet thereon and drawing it over his head. Then he bent his back in semicircular fashion and closed his eyes after performing certain rites, probably magnetic passes and sacramental words, designed to fix imagination and determine the action of will. The woolen mantle is of great use in magic, and was the common conveyance of sorcerers on their way to the Sabbath, which proves that the sorcerers did not really go to the Sabbath, but the Sabbath came to the sorcerers when isolated in their mantle, and brought before their translucid images analogous to their magical preoccupations, combined with reflections of all kindred acts accomplished previously in the world. This torrent of universal life is represented also in religious doctrines by the expiatory fire of hell. It is the instrument of initiation, the monster to be overcome, the enemy to subdue. It is this which brings to our evocations and to the conjurations of goetic magic such swarms of larvae and phantoms. Therein are preserved all the fantastic and fortuitous assemblages of forms which people our nightmares with such abominable monstrosities. To be sucked down by this whirling stream is to fall into abysses of madness, more frightful than those of death. To expel the shades of this chaos and compel it to give perfect forms to our thoughts, this is to be a man of genius. It is to create. It is to be victorious over hell. The astral light directs the instincts of animals and offers battle to the intelligence of man, which it strives to pervert by the enticements of its reflections and the illusion of its images. It is a fatal and inevitable operation, directed and made still more calamitous by elementary spirits and suffering souls, whose restless wills seek out sympathies in our weakness and tempt us, but not so much to destroy us as to win friends for themselves. That book of consciences which, according to Christian doctrine, shall be opened at the last day is no other than the astral light, which preserves the impress of every logos, that is to say, of all actions and all forms. Our acts modify our magnetic respiration in such a way that a seer, meeting any person for the first time, can tell whether he is innocent or criminal, and what are his virtues or his crimes. This faculty, which belongs to divination, was called by the Christian mystics of the early church the discernment of spirits. Those who abdicate the empire of reason and permit their wills to wander in pursuit of reflections in the astral light are subject to alternations of mania and melancholy which have originated all the marvels of demoniacal possession, though it is true at the same time that by means of these reflections impure spirits can act upon such souls, make use of them as docile instruments, and even habitually torment their organism, wherein they enter and reside by obsession or embryonically. These Kabbalistic terms are explained in the Hebrew book of the Revolution of Souls, of which our 13th chapter will contain a succinct analysis. It is therefore extremely dangerous to make sport of the mysteries of magic. It is above all excessively rash to practice its rites from curiosity, by way of experiment and as if to exploit higher forces. The inquisitive who, without being adepts, busy themselves with evocations or occult magnetism, are like children playing with fire in the neighborhood of a cask of gunpowder. Sooner or later they will fall victims to some terrible explosion. To be isolated from the astral light, it is not enough to envelop one's self in a woolen fabric. We must also, and above all, impose absolute tranquility on mind and heart. We must have quitted the world of passions and be assured of perseverance in the spontaneous operations of an inflexible will. We must reiterate frequently the acts of this will, for, as we shall see in the introduction to the ritual, it is by acts only that confidence is assured to the will, as the power and perpetuity of religions depend on their rites and ceremonies. They are intoxicating substances which, by increasing nervous sensibility, exalt the power and consequently the allurements of astral representations. By the same means, but pursuing a contrary course, spirits may be terrified and disturbed. These substances, of themselves magnetic and magnetized further by operators, are what people term philters and enchanted potions. But we shall not enter here upon this dangerous aspect of the practice, which Cornelius Agrippa himself terms venomous magic. It is true that there are no longer pyres for sorcerers, but always and more than ever are there penalties dealt out to malefactors. Let us confine ourselves therefore to stating, as the occasion offers, the reality of such power. To direct the astral light, we must understand also its twofold vibration, as well as the balance of forces termed magical equilibrium, expressed in the Kabbalah by the Senary. Considered in its first cause, this equilibrium is the will of God. It is liberty in man and mathematical equilibrium in matter. Equilibrium produces stability and duration. Liberty generates the immortality of man, and the will of God gives effect to the laws of eternal reason. Equilibrium in ideas is reason and enforces power. Equilibrium is exact. Fulfill its law and it is there. Violate it, however slightly, and it is destroyed. For this reason, nothing is useless or lost. Every utterance and every movement are for or against equilibrium, for or against truth, which is composed of for and against conciliated, or at least equilibrated. We shall state in the introduction to the ritual how magical equilibrium should be produced, and why it is necessary to the success of all operations. Omnipotence is the most absolute liberty. Now, absolute liberty cannot exist apart from perfect equilibrium. Magical equilibrium is hence one of the first conditions of success in the operations of science, and must be sought even in occult chemistry, in learning to combine contraries without neutralizing them by one another. Magical equilibrium explains the great and primeval mystery of the existence and relative necessity of evil. This relative necessity gives, in black magic, the measure of the power of demons or impure spirits, to whom virtues practiced upon earth are a source of increased rage and apparently of increased power. At the epochs when saints and angels work miracles openly, sorcerers and fiends in their turn operate marvels and prodigies. Rivalry often creates success. We lean upon that which resists. The Fiery Sword, Nexa Gladius. The septenary is the sacred number in all theogonies and in all symbols, because it is composed of the triad and the tetrad. The number 7 represents magical power in all its fullness. It is the mind reinforced by all elementary potencies. It is the soul served by nature. It is the sanctum regnum mentioned in the Keys of Solomon and represented in the tarot by a crowned warrior who bears a triangle on his cuirass and is poised upon a cube, to which 2 sphinxes are harnessed, straining in opposite directions, while their heads are turned the same way. This warrior is armed with a fiery sword and holds in his left hand a scepter surmounted by a triangle and a sphere. The cube is the philosophical stone. The sphinxes are the 2 forces of the great agent, corresponding to Jachin and Boaz, the 2 pillars of the temple. The cuirass is the knowledge of divine things, which renders the wise man invulnerable to human assaults. The scepter is the magic wand. The fiery sword is the symbol of victory over the deadly sins, 7 in number, like the virtues, the conceptions of both being typified by the ancients under the figures of the 7 planets then known. Thus faith, that aspiration towards the infinite, that noble self-reliance sustained by confidence in all virtues, the faith which in weak natures may degenerate into pride, was represented by the sun. Hope, the enemy of avarice, by the moon. Charity, in opposition to luxury, by Venus, the bright star of morning and evening. Strength, superior to wrath, by Mars. Prudence, hostile to idleness, by Mercury. Temperance, opposed to gluttony, by Saturn, who was given a stone instead of his children to devour. Finally, justice in opposition to envy, by Jupiter, the conqueror of the Titans. Such are the symbols borrowed by astronomy from the Hellenic cultus. In the Kabbalah of the Hebrews, the sun represents the angel of light, the moon the angel of aspirations and dreams, Mars the destroying angel, Varius the angel of loves, Mercury the angel of progress, Jupiter the angel of power, Saturn the angel of the wilderness. They were named also Michael, Gabriel, Samael, Anael, Raphael, Zachariel, and Oriphael. These governing potencies of souls shared human life during successive periods, which astrologers measured by the revolutions of the corresponding planets. But Kabbalistic astrology must not be confounded with that which is called judicial. We will explain this distinction. Infancy is dedicated to the sun, childhood to the moon, youth to Mars and Venus, manhood to Mercury, ripe age to Jupiter, and old age to Saturn. Now, humanity in general subsists under laws of development analogous to those of individual life. On this basis, Trithemius establishes his prophetic key of the 7 spirits, to which we shall refer subsequently. By means thereof, observing the analogical proportions of successive events, it is possible to predict important future occurrences with certitude, and to fix beforehand from age to age the destinies of nations and the world. St. John, depositary of the secret doctrine of Christ, has commemorated this sequence in the Kabbalistic book of the Apocalypse, which he represents sealed with 7 seals. We meet also the 7 genii of ancient mythologies and the cups and swords of the tarot. The doctrine concealed under these emblems is pure Kabbalah, already lost by the Pharisees at the time of Christ's advent. The scenes which succeeded one another in this wonderful prophetic epic are so many pentacles, the keys of which are the ternary, the quaternary, the septenary, and the duodenary. Its hieroglyphic figures are analogous to those of the Book of Hermes or the Genesis of Enoch, to make use of a tentative title which expresses merely the personal opinion of the erudite William Postal. The cherub or symbolic bull which Moses placed at the gate of the Edenic world, bearing a fiery sword, is a sphinx, having a bull's body and a human head. It is the antique Assyrian sphinx, and the combat and victory of Mithras were its hieroglyphic analysis. Now this armed sphinx represents the law of mystery, which watches at the door of initiation to warn away the profane. Voltaire, who knew nothing of all this, was highly diverted at the notion of a bull brandishing a sword. What would he have said had he visited the ruins of Memphis and Thebes, and what would the echo of past ages which slumbers in the tombs of Ramesses have replied to those light sarcasms so much relished in France? The mosaic cherub represents also the great magical mystery, of which the elements are expressed by the septenary, without, however, giving the final word. This verbum in an arabile of the sages of the Alexandrian school, this word which Hebrew Kabbalists write and interpret by thus expressing the triplicity of the secondary principle, the dualism of means, the equal unity of the first and final principle, the alliance between the triad and the tetrad in a word composed of 4 letters, which forms 7 by means of a triple and double repetition. This word is pronounced ararita. The virtue of the septenary is absolute in magic, for this number is decisive in all things. Hence all religions have consecrated it in their rites. The 7th year was a jubilee among the Jews. The 7th day is set apart for rest and prayer. There are 7 sacraments, etc. The 7 colors of the prism and the 7 musical notes correspond also to the 7 planets of the ancients. That is, to the 7 chords of the human lyre. The spiritual heaven has never changed, and astrology has been more invariable than astronomy. The 7 planets are, in fact, the hieroglyphic symbols of the keyboard of our affections. To compose talismans of the sun, moon, or Saturn is to attach the will magnetically to signs corresponding to the chief powers of the soul. To consecrate something to Mercury or Venus is to magnetize that object according to a direct intention, whether pleasure, science, or profit be the end in view. The analogous metals, animals, plants, and perfumes are auxiliaries to this end. The 7 magical animals are A, among birds, corresponding to the divine world, the swan, the owl, the vulture, the dove, the stork, the eagle, and the pewit. B, among fish, corresponding to the spiritual or scientific world, the seal, the catfish, the pike, the mullet, the chub, the dolphin, the sepia, or cuttlefish. C, among quadrupeds, corresponding to the natural world, the lion, the cat, the wolf, the he-goat, the monkey, the stag, and the mole. The blood, fat, liver, and gall of these animals serve in enchantments. Their brain combines with the perfumes of the planets, and it is recognized by ancient practice that they possess magnetic virtues corresponding to the 7 planetary influences. The talismans of the 7 spirits are engraved either on precious stones such as the carbuncle, crystal, diamond, emerald, agate, sapphire, and onyx, or upon metals such as gold, silver, iron, copper, fixed mercury, pewter, and lead. The Kabbalistic signs of the 7 spirits are, for the sun, a serpent with the head of a lion, for the moon, a globe divided by 2 crescents, for Mars, a dragon biting the hilt of a sword, for Venus, a lingam, for Mercury, the hermetic caduceus and the cynocephalus, for Jupiter, the blazing pentagram and the talons or beak of an eagle, for Saturn, a lame and aged man, or a serpent curled about the sunstone. All these symbols are found on engraved stones of the ancients, and especially on those talismans of the Gnostic epochs which are known by the name of Abraxas. In the collection of the talismans of Paracelsus, Jupiter is represented by a priest in ecclesiastical garb, while in the tarot he appears as a grand hierophant, crowned with a triple tiara, holding a three-barred cross in his hands, forming the magical triangle and representing at once the scepter and key of the three worlds. By collating all that has been said about the unity of the triad and tetrad, we shall find all that remains to be told concerning the septenary, that grand and complete magical unity composed of 4 and 3. Realization. Hoc vivens. Causes manifest by effects, and effects are proportioned to causes. The divine word, the one word, the tetragram, is self-affirmed by tetradic creation. Human fecundity proves divine fecundity. The jod of the divine name is the eternal virility of the first principle. Man understands that he was made in the image of God when he attains comprehension of God by increasing to infinity the idea which he forms of himself. When realizing God as the infinite man, man says unto himself, I am the finite God. Magic differs from mysticism because it judges nothing a priori until after it is established a posteriori, the actual base of its judgments. That is to say, after having apprehended the cause by the effects contained in the energy of the cause itself, by means of the universal law of analogy. Hence, in the occult sciences, all is real, and theories are established only on the foundations of experience. Realities alone constitute the proportions of the ideal, and the Magus admits nothing as certain in the domain of ideas save that which is demonstrated by realization. In other words, what is true in the cause manifests in the effect. What is not realized does not exist. The realization of speech is the logos, properly so called. A thought is realized in becoming speech. It is realized also by signs, sounds, and representations of signs. Here is the first degree of realization. Then it is imprinted on the astral light by means of the signs of writing or speech. It influences other minds by reflections upon them. It is refracted by crossing the diaphany of other men. It assumes new forms and proportions. It is translated into acts and modifies the world. This is the last degree of realization. Men who are born into a world modified by an idea bear away with them the mark thereof, and it is thus that the Word is made flesh. The mark of the disobedience of Adam, preserved in the astral light, could be effaced only by the stronger mark of the obedience of the Savior, and thus the original sin and redemption of the world can be explained in a natural and magical sense. The astral light, or soul of the world, was the instrument of Adam's omnipotence. It became afterwards that of his punishment, being corrupted and troubled by his sin, which intermingled in impure reflection with those primitive images which compose the book of universal science for his still virgin imagination. The astral light, depicted in ancient symbols by the serpent devouring its tail, represents alternately malice and prudence, time and eternity, tempter and redeemer. For this light, being the vehicle of life, is an auxiliary alike of good and evil, and may be taken not only for the fiery form of Satan, but for the body of the Holy Ghost. It is the instrument of warfare in angelic battles, and feeds indifferently both the flames of hell and the lightnings of St. Michael. It may be compared to a horse having a nature analogous to the chameleon, ever reflecting the armor of his rider. The astral light is the realization or form of intellectual light, as the latter is the realization or form of the divine light. The great initiator of Christianity, seeing that the astral light was overcharged with the impure reflections of Roman debauchery, sought to separate his disciples from the circumambient sphere of reflections and to concentrate them only on the interior light, so that, through the medium of a common faith and enthusiasm, they might communicate together by new magnetic chains, which he termed grace, and thus overcome the dissolute currents, to which he gave the names of the devil and Satan, signifying their putrefaction. To oppose current to current is to renew the power of fluidic life. The revealers have therefore done scarcely more than divine, by the accuracy of their calculations, the appropriate moment for moral reactions. The law of realization produces what we call magnetic breathing. Places and objects become impregnated therewith, and this imparts to them an influence in conformity with our dominant desires, with those above all which are confirmed and realized by acts. As a fact, the universal agent or latent astral light ever seeks equilibrium. It fills the void and draws in the plenitude, which makes vice contagious, like certain physical maladies, and works powerfully in the proselytism of virtue. Hence it is that cohabitation with antipathetic beings is a torment. Hence it is that relics, whether of saints or of great criminals, produce extraordinary results in sudden conversion and perversion. Hence it is that sexual love is often awakened by a breath or a touch, and this not only by means of contact with the person himself, but with objects which he has unconsciously touched or magnetized. There is an outbreathing and inbreathing of the soul, exactly like that of the body. Whatsoever it regards as felicity, that it inhales, and it breathes forth ideas which result from its inner sensations. Diseased souls have an evil breath and vitiate their moral atmosphere. That is, they combine impure reflections with the astral light which permeates them, and establish unwholesome currents therein. We are often assailed to our astonishment in society by evil thoughts which would have seemed antecedently impossible, and are not aware that they are due to some morbid proximity. This secret is of high importance, for it leads to the unveiling of consciences, one of the most incontestable and terrible powers of magical art. Magnetic respiration produces about the soul a radiation of which it is the center, and thus surrounds it with the reflection of its own works, creating for it a heaven or hell. There are no isolated acts, and it is impossible that there should be secret acts. Whatsoever we will truly, that is, everything which we confirm by our acts, remains registered in the astral light, where our reflections are preserved. These reflections influence our thought continually by the mediation of the diaphany, and it is in this sense that we become and remain the children of our works. The astral light, transformed at the moment of conception into human light, is the soul's first envelope, and in combination with extremely subtle fluids, it forms the ethereal body or sidereal phantom, of which Paracelsus discourses in his philosophy of intuition, Philosophia Sagax. This sidereal body, being liberated at death, attracts and for a long time preserves, through the sympathy of things homogeneous, the reflections of the past life. If drawn into a special current by a will which is powerfully sympathetic, it manifests naturally, for there is nothing more natural than prodigies. It is thus apparitions are produced. But we shall develop this point more fully in a chapter devoted to necromancy. The fluidic body, subject, like the mass of the astral light, to two contrary movements, attracting on the left and repelling on the right, or reciprocally between the two sexes, begets various impulses within us and contributes to solicitudes of conscience. It is influenced frequently by reflections of other minds, and thus temptations are produced on the one hand, and on the other profound and unexpected graces. The traditional doctrine of two angels who sustain and tempt us is explained in this manner. The two forces of the astral light may be represented by a balance, wherein are weighed our good intentions for the triumph of justice and the emancipation of our liberty. The astral body is not always of the same sex as the terrestrial. That is, the proportions of the two forces varying from right to left seem frequently to belie the visible organization, producing seeming aberrations of human passion and explaining, while in no wise morally justifying the amorous peculiarities of Anacreon or Sappho. A skillful magnetizer should take all these subtle distinctions into account, and we shall provide in our ritual the rules for their recognition. There are two kinds of realization, the true and the fantastic. The first is the exclusive secret of magicians. The other belongs to enchanters and sorcerers. Mythologies are fantastic realizations of religious dogma. Superstitions are the sorcery of mistaken piety. But even mythologies and superstitions are more efficacious on human will than a purely speculative philosophy apart from any practice. Hence St. Paul opposes the conquests of the folly of the cross to the inertness of human wisdom. Religion realizes philosophy by adapting it to the weaknesses of the vulgar. Such is, for Kabbalists, the secret reason and occult explanation of the doctrines of incarnation and redemption. Thoughts untranslated into speech are thoughts lost for humanity. Words unconfirmed by acts are idle words, and the idle word is not far removed from falsehood. Thought formulated by speech and confirmed by acts constitutes a good work or a crime. Hence, whether in vice or virtue, there is no utterance for which we are not responsible. Above all, there are no indifferent acts. Curses and blessings produce their consequence invariably, and every action, whatsoever its nature, whether inspired by love or hate, has effects analogous to its motive, its extent, and its direction. When that emperor whose images had been mutilated, raising his hand to his face, exclaimed, "I do not feel that I am injured," he was mistaken in his valuation and detracted thereby from the merit of his clemency. What man of honor could behold undisturbed an insult offered to his portrait? And did such insults, inflicted even unknown to ourselves, react on us by a fatal influence, or the effects of bewitchment actual, as indeed an adept cannot doubt how much more imprudent and ill-advised would seem this utterance of the good emperor? There are persons whom we can never offend with impunity, and if the injury we have done them is mortal, we begin forthwith to die. There are those also whom we never meet in vain, whose mere glance alters the direction of our life. The basilisk who slays by a look is no fable, it is a magical allegory. Generally speaking, it is bad for health to have enemies, and we can never brave with impunity the reprobation of anyone. Before opposing ourselves to a given force or current, we must be well assured that we possess the contrary force, or are with the stream of the contrary current. Otherwise we shall be crushed or struck down, and many sudden deaths have no other cause than this. The terrible visitations of Nadab and Abihu, of Osa, of Ananias, and Sapphira, were occasioned by electric currents of outraged convictions. The sufferings of the Ursulines of Loudun, the nuns of Louviers, and the convulsionaries of Jansenism were identical in principle and are explicable by the same occult natural laws. Had not urban grandeur been immolated, one of two things would have occurred. Either the possessed nuns would have died in frightful convulsions, or the phenomena of diabolical frenzy would have so gained in strength and influence epidemically that grandeur, notwithstanding his knowledge and his reason, would also have become hallucinated, and to such a degree that he would have denounced himself, like the unhappy Gaufridi, or would otherwise have perished suddenly, with all the appalling characteristics of poisoning or of divine vengeance. In the 18th century, the unfortunate poet Gilbert fell a victim to his audacity in braving the current of opinion and even of philosophical fanaticism which characterized his epoch. Guilty of philosophical treason, he died raving mad, possessed by the most incredible terrors, as if God himself had punished him for defending his cause out of season. As a fact, he perished by reason of a law of nature of which, assuredly, he knew nothing. He set himself against an electric current and was struck down as by lightning. Had Marat not been assassinated by Charlotte Corday, he would have been destroyed infallibly by a reaction of public feeling. It was the execration of decent people which afflicted him with leprosy, and he would have had to succumb thereto. The reprobation excited by the massacre of St. Bartholomew was the sole cause of the atrocious disease and death of Charles IX, while had not Henry IV been sustained by an immense popularity, which he owed to the projecting power of sympathetic force of his astral life, he would scarcely have outlived his conversion, but would have perished under the contempt of Protestants, combined with the suspicion and ill will of Catholics. Unpopularity may be a proof of integrity and courage, but never of policy or prudence. The wounds inflicted by opinion are mortal for statesmen. We may recall the premature and violent end of many illustrious persons whom it would be inexpedient to mention here. The brandings of public opinion may be often great injustices, but nonetheless they condemn their victims to failure and are often a death sentence. On the other hand, acts of injustice done to a single individual can and should, if unatoned, cause the ruin of an entire nation or of a whole society. This is what is called the cry of blood, For at the root of every injustice there is the germ of homicide. By reason of these terrible laws of solidarity, Christianity recommends so strongly the forgiveness of injuries and reconciliation. He who dies unforgiven casts himself dagger-armed into eternity and condemns himself to the horrors of an eternal murder. The efficacy of paternal or maternal blessings or curses is an invincible popular tradition and belief. As a fact, the closer the bonds which unite two persons, the more terrible are the consequences of hatred between them. The brand of Althea consuming the life of Meleager is the mythological symbol of this terrible power. Let parents be ever on their guard, for no one can kindle hell in his own blood, or devote his own issue to misfortune, without being himself burnt and made wretched. To pardon is never a crime, but to curse is always a danger and an evil action. Initiation, Jesod Bonum. The initiate is he who possesses the lamp of Trismegistus, the mantle of Apollonius, and the staff of the patriarchs. The lamp of Trismegistus is reason illuminated by science. The mantle of Apollonius is full and complete self-possession, which isolates the sage from blind tendencies, and the staff of the patriarchs is the help of the secret and everlasting forces of nature. The lamp of Trismegistus enlightens present, past, and future, lays bare the conscience of men, and manifests the inmost recesses of the female heart. The lamp burns with a triple flame, the mantle is thrice folded, and the staff is divided into 3 parts. The number 9 is that of divine reflections. It expresses the divine idea in all its abstract power, but it signifies also extravagance in belief, and hence superstition and idolatry. For this reason, Hermes made it the number of initiation, because the initiate reigns over superstition, and by superstition, he alone can advance through the darkness, leaning on his staff, enveloped in his mantle and lighted by his lamp. Reason has been given to all men, but all do not know how to make use of it. It is a science to be acquired. Liberty is offered to all, but not all can be free. It is a right that must be earned. Force is for all, but all do not know how to rest upon it. It is a power that must be won. We attain nothing without more than one effort. The destiny of man is to be enriched by his own earning, and afterwards to have, like God, the glory and pleasure of dispensing it. Magic was called formerly the sacerdotal art and the royal art, because initiation gave empire over souls to the sage and the capacity for ruling wills. Divination is also one of the privileges of the initiate. Now, divination is simply the knowledge of effects contained in causes, and science applied to the facts of the universal dogma of analogy. Human acts are not written in the astral light alone. Their traces are left upon the face. They modify mien and carriage. They change the tone of the voice. Thus, every man bears about him the history of his life, which is legible for the initiate. Now the future is ever the consequence of the past, and unexpected circumstances do not appreciably alter results reasonably calculated. The destiny of each man can be therefore foretold him. An entire existence may be judged by a single movement. A single oddity or weakness may be the presage of a long chain of misfortunes. Caesar was assassinated because he was ashamed of being bald. Napoleon ended his days at St. Helena because he admired the poems of Ossian. Louis Philippe abdicated the throne as he did because he carried an umbrella. These are paradoxes for the vulgar who cannot grasp the occult relation of things, but they are causes for the adept who understands all and is surprised at nothing. Initiation is a preservative against the false lights of mysticism. It equips human reason with its relative value and proportional infallibility, connecting it with supreme reason by the chain of analogies. Hence the initiate knows no doubtful hopes, no absurd fears, because he has no irrational beliefs. He is acquainted with the extent of his power, and he can be bold without danger. For him, therefore, to dare is to be able. Here, then, is a new interpretation of his attributes. His lamp represents learning, the mantle which enwraps him, his discretion, while his staff is the emblem of his strength and boldness. He knows, he dares, and is silent. He knows the secrets of the future. He dares in the present, and he is silent in the past. He knows the failings of the human heart. He dares make use of them to achieve his work, and he is silent as to his purposes. He knows the significance of all symbolisms and of all religions. He dares to practice or abstain from them without hypocrisy and without impiety, and he is silent upon the one dogma of supreme initiation. He knows the existence and nature of the great magical agent. He dares perform the acts and give utterance to the words which make it subject to human will, and he is silent upon the mysteries of the great arcanum. So may you find him often melancholy, never dejected or despairing, often poor, never abject or miserable, persecuted often, never disheartened or conquered. He remembers the bereavement and murder of Orpheus, the exile and lonely death of Moses, the martyrdom of the prophets, the tortures of Apollonius, the cross of the Savior. He knows the desolation in which Agrippa died, whose memory is even now slandered. He knows what labors overcame the great Paracelsus, and all that Raymond Lully was condemned to undergo that he might finish by a violent death. He remembers Swedenborg simulating madness and even losing reason in order to excuse his science, St. Martin and his hidden life, Cagliostro, who perished forsaken in the cells of the Inquisition, Cazot, who ascended the scaffold. Inheritor of so many victims, he does not dare the less, but he understands better the necessity for silence. Let us follow his example. Let us learn diligently. When we know, let us have courage, and let us be silent. The Kabbalah. Malkuth Principium Phallus. All religions have preserved the remembrance of a primitive book written in hieroglyphs by the sages of the earliest epoch of the world. Simplified and vulgarized in later days, its symbols furnished letters to the art of writing, characters to the word, and to occult philosophy its mysterious signs and panticles. This book, attributed by the Hebrews to Enoch, seventh master of the world after Adam, by the Egyptians to Hermes Trismegistus, by the Greeks to Cadmus, the mysterious builder of the holy city, this book was the symbolical summary of primitive tradition, called subsequently Kabbalah or Kabbalah, meaning reception. The tradition in question rests altogether on the one dogma of magic. The visible is for us the proportional measure of the invisible. Now the ancients, observing that equilibrium is the universal law in physics, and is consequent on the apparent opposition of two forces, argued from physical to metaphysical equilibrium, and maintained that in God, that is, in the first living and active cause, there must be recognized two properties which are necessary one to another: stability and motion, necessity and liberty, rational order and volitional autonomy, justice and love, whence also severity and mercy. And these two attributes were personified, so to speak, by the Kabbalistic Jews under the names of Geburah and Chesed. Above Geburah and Chesed abides the supreme crown, the equilibrating power, principle of the world or equilibrated kingdom, which we find mentioned under the name of Malkuth in the occult and Kabbalistic versicle of the Paternoster, to which we have already referred. But Geburah and Chesed, maintained in equilibrium by the crown above and the kingdom below, constitute two principles which may be considered either from an abstract point of view or in their realization. In their abstract or idolized sense, they take the higher names of Chokhmah, wisdom, and Bina, intelligence. Their realization is stability and progress, that is, eternity and victory, Hod and Netzah. Such, according to the Kabbalah, is the groundwork of all religions and all sciences. A triple triangle and a circle, the notion of the triad explained by the balance multiplied by itself in the domains of the ideal, then the realization of this conception in forms. Now the ancients attached the first notions of this simple and impressive theology to the very idea of numbers, and qualified the figure of the first decade after the following manner. 1. Kether, the crown, the equilibrating power. 2. Chokmah, wisdom, equilibrated in its unchangeable order by the initiative of intelligence. 3. Bina, active intelligence, equilibrated by wisdom. 4. Chesed, Mercy, which is wisdom in its secondary conception, ever benevolent because it is strong. 5. Gebura, severity, necessitated by wisdom itself and by goodwill. To permit evil is to hinder good. 6. Tifereth, beauty, the luminous conception of equilibrium in forms, intermediary between the crown and the kingdom, mediating principle between creator and creation, a sublime conception of poetry and its sovereign priesthood. 7. Netza, victory, that is, eternal triumph of intelligence and justice. 8. Hod, eternity of the conquests achieved by mind over matter, active over passive, life over death. 9. Jesod, the foundation, that is, the basis of all belief and all truth, otherwise the absolute in philosophy. 10. Malkuth, the kingdom, meaning the universe, entire creation, the work and mirror of God, the proof of supreme reason, the formal consequence which compels us to have recourse to virtual premises, the enigma which has God for its answer, that is to say, supreme and absolute reason. These 10 primary notions attached to the first 10 characters of the primitive alphabet, signifying both principles and numbers, are called the 10 Sephiroth by the masters in Kabbalah. The sacred tetragram drawn in the following manner indicates the number, source, and correspondence of divine names. To this name of Jotshava, written by these 4 and 20 signs, crowned with a triple flower of light, must be referred the 24 thrones of heaven and the 24 crowned elders in the Apocalypse. In the Kabbalah, the occult principle is called the Ancient, and this principle, multiplied and, as it were, reflected in secondary causes, creates images of itself. That is to say, so many ancients as there are diverse conceptions of its unique essence. These images, less perfect in proportion as they are removed farther from their source, project upon the darkness an ultimate reflection or glimmer, representing a horrible and deformed ancient who is termed vulgarly the devil. Hence an initiate has been bold enough to say, the devil is God as understood by the wicked, while another has added in words more bizarre but no less energetic, the devil is composed of God's ruins. We may sum up and explain these strikingly novel definitions by remarking that in symbolism itself, the demon is an angel cast out of heaven for having sought to usurp divinity. This belongs to the allegorical language of prophets and makers of legends. Philosophically speaking, the devil is a human idea of divinity, which has been surpassed and dispossessed of human by the progress of science and reason. Among primitive Oriental peoples, Moloch, Adramelech, Baal were personifications of the one God, dishonored by barbarous attributes. The god of the Jansenists creating hell for the majority of human beings and delighting in the eternal tortures of those he was unwilling to save is a conception even more barbarous than that of Moloch. Hence, the god of the Jansenists is already a veritable Satan, fallen from heaven in the sight of every wise and enlightened Christian. In the multiplication of the divine names, the Kabbalists have connected them all, either with the unity of the tetragram, the figure of the triad, or the Sephirotic scale of the decad. They arrange the scale of the divine names and numbers in a triangle which may be presented in Roman characters as follows. The sum of all these divine names formed from the one tetragram, but outside the tetragram itself, is a basis of the Hebrew ritual and constitutes the occult force which the Kabbalistic rabbins invoke under the title of Shemhamphoros. We have now to concern ourselves with the tarot from the Kabbalistic point of view, and have already indicated the occult source of the name. This hieroglyphic book is composed of a Kabbalistic alphabet and of a wheel or circle of 4 decades, distinguished by 4 symbolical and typical figures, each having for its radius a scale of 4 progressive figures, which represent humanity: man, woman, youth, childmaster, mistress, knight, esquire. The 22 figures of the alphabet represent, in the first place, the 13 dogmas, and secondly, the 9 beliefs authorized by that Jewish religion which is so strong and so firmly established on highest reason. Here follows the religious and Kabbalistic key of the tarot, formulated in technical verses after the mode of the ancient lawgivers. A conscious, active cause in all we see, and number proves the living unity. No bound hath he who doth the whole contain, but all proceeding fills life's vast domain. Soul-worthy worship, he, the only Lord, doth his true doctrine to clean hearts accord. But since faith's works a single pontiff need, one law have we, and at one altar plead. Eternal God for aye their base upholds, heaven and man's day alike his rule unfolds. In mercy rich, in retribution strong, his people's king he will upraise ere long. The tomb gives entrance to the promised land. Death only ends, life's vistas still expand. These doctrines sacred, pure, and steadfast shine, and thus we close our numbers scale divine. Good angels all things temper and assuage, while evil spirits burst with wrath and rage. God doth the lightning rule, the flame subdue. His word controls both vesper and her dew. He makes the moon our watchman through the night, and by his sun renews the world in light. When dust to dust returns, his breath can call life from the tomb, which is the fate of all. His crown illuminates the mercy seat, and glorifies the cherubs at his feet. By the help of this purely dogmatic explanation, we shall already understand the Kabbalistic alphabet of the tarot. Thus, figure 1, entitled The Juggler, represents the active principle in the economy of divine and human autotalia. Figure 2, vulgarly called Pope Joan, represents dogmatic unity based upon numbers, and is the personification of the Kabbalah or the Gnosis. Figure 3 represents divine spirituality under the emblem of a winged woman, holding in one hand the apocalyptic eagle, and in the other the world suspended from the end of her scepter. The other emblems are equally clear and can be explained as easily as the first. Turning now to the 4 suits, namely clubs, cups, swords, and circles or pentacles, commonly called deniers. All these are hieroglyphics of the tetragram. Thus, the club is the Egyptian phallus or Hebrew jod. The cup is the teis or primitive he. The sword is the conjunction of both, or the lingam, represented in Hebrew preceding the captivity by vow, while the circle or pentacle, image of the world, is the he final of the divine name. Now let us take a tarot and combine all its emblems one by one into the wheel or rota of William Postel. Let us group the 4 aces, the 4 twos, and so on together. We shall then have 10 packs of cards giving the hieroglyphic interpretation of the triangle of divine names on the scale of the denarii, as previously tabulated. By referring each number to its corresponding sephira, we may then read them off as follows. 4 signs present the name of every name. 1 Kitover, the 4 aces. 4 brilliant beams adorn his crown of flame. 2 Chokmah, the 4 twos. 4 rivers ever from his wisdom flow. 3 Bina, the 4 threes. 4 proofs of his intelligence we know. 4 Chesed, the 4 fours. 4 benefactions from his mercy come. 5 Geburah, the 4 fives. 4 times 4 sins avenged his justice sum. 6 Tifereth, the 4 sixes. 4 rays unclouded make his beauty known. 7 Netzah, the 4 sevens. 4 times his conquest shall in song be shown. 8 Hod, the 4 eights. 4 times he triumphs on the timeless plain. 9 Jesod, the 4 nines. Foundations 4 his great white throne maintain. 10 Malkuth, the 4 tens. 1 fourfold kingdom owns his endless sway, as from his crown there streams a fourfold ray. By this simple arrangement, the Kabbalistic meaning of each card is exhibited. For example, the 5 of clubs signifies rigorously Geburah of Jod, that is, the justice of the Creator or the wrath of man. The 7 of cups signifies the victory of mercy or the triumph of woman. The 8 of swords signifies conflict or eternal equilibrium, and so of the others. We can thus understand how the ancient pontiffs proceeded to make the oracle speak. The chance dealing of the laminae produced invariably a fresh Kabbalistic meaning, exactly true in its combinations, which alone were fortuitous. And seeing that the faith of the ancients attributed nothing to chance, they read the answers of providence in the oracles of the tarot, which were called theraph or teraphim by the Hebrews, as the erudite Kabbalist Gaffarel, one of the magicians employed by Cardinal Richelieu, was the first to perceive. As to the court cards, a final couplet will suffice to explain them. King, Queen, Knight, Esquire, the married pair, the youth, the child, the race, thy path by these to unity retrace. At the end of the ritual we shall provide further details, together with full documents concerning the marvelous book of the tarot, of all books the most primitive, the key of prophecies and dogmas, in a word, the inspiration of inspired works, a fact which has remained unperceived, not only by the science of Court de Ghibelline, but by the extraordinary intuitions of Etela or Aliette. The 10 Sephiroth and the 22 tarots form what the Kabbalists term the 32 paths of absolute science. With regard to particular sciences, they distinguish them into 50 chapters, which they call the 50 gates. Among Orientals, the word gate signifies government or authority. The rabbins also divided the Kabbalah into Bereshith, or universal Genesis, and Merkava, or the chariot of Ezekiel. Then, by means of a dual interpretation of the Kabbalistic alphabets, they formed two sciences called Gematria and Temura, and so composed the notary art, which is fundamentally the complete science of the tarot signs and their complex and varied application to the divination of all secrets, whether of philosophy, nature, or the future itself. We shall recur to this work in the 20th chapter of our ritual. The Magic Chain, Manus Force. The great magical agent, by us termed the astral light, by others the soul of the earth, and designated by old chemists under the names of azoth and magnesia, this occult, unique, and indubitable force is the key of all empire, the secret of all power. It is the winged dragon of Medea, the serpent of the Edenic mystery. It is the universal glass of visions, the bond of sympathies, the source of love, prophecy, and glory. To know how to make use of this agent is to be the trustee of God's own power. All real, effective magic, all occult force is there, and its demonstration is the sole end of all genuine books of science. To have control of the great magical agent, there are two operations necessary: to concentrate and project, or, in other words, to fix and to move. Fixity has been provided as the basis and guarantee of movement by the author of all things. The magus must go to work in like manner. It is said that enthusiasm is contagious, and why? Because it cannot be produced in the absence of rooted faith. Faith produces faith. To believe is to have a reason for willing. To will with reason is to will with power. I do not say with an infinite, but with an indefinite power. What operates in the intellectual and moral world obtains still more in the physical, and when Archimedes was in want of a lever to move the world, he was seeking simply the great magical arcanum. One arm of the androgyny figure of Henry Kunrath bore the word coagula and the other solve, to collect and diffuse our nature's two words. But after what manner can we accomplish these operations on the astral light or soul of the world? Concentration is by isolation, and distribution by the magical chain. Isolation consists in absolute independence of thought, complete liberty of the heart, and perfect continence of the senses. Every man who is obsessed by prejudices and fears, every passionate person who is slave of his passions, is incapable of concentrating or coagulating, according to the expression of Kunrath, the astral light or soul of the earth. All true adepts have been independent even amidst torture, sober and chaste unto death. The explanation of such anomaly is this: in order to dispose of a force, you must not be surprised by this force in a way that it may dispose of you. But then will exclaim those who seek only in magic for a method of inordinately satisfying the lusts of nature, of what avail is power which must not be used for our own